He laughed when the radio crackled with desperate voices. Marcus Vale, a former U.S. military contractor turned enemy commander, leaned back in his chair and said, "Let them beg." 12 U.S. Army Rangers were pinned inside a canyon he had designed specifically to kill them. Every exit sealed. Every high ground taken. He had studied these men for months, and now he was watching them die. But what Marcus Vale never accounted for, what nobody on that battlefield knew, was the single woman lying completely still, 1 mile away, her eye already pressed against the scope. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The briefing room at Fort Liberty smelled like old coffee and dry erase markers, and Captain Ethan Walker had been sitting in that particular plastic chair for 40 minutes before anyone told him the truth. The intelligence officer, a thin man named Graves, who always looked like he was trying to remember something important, kept circling back to the same satellite image. A canyon system in the high desert of northern Arizona. Red elevation markers, blue grid lines, and a series of small yellow dots that Graves kept calling observed positions without ever saying the word that Walker was thinking. Ambush. "Walk me through it again," Walker said. He kept his voice flat. His men were watching him from the seats along the wall, and he had learned a long time ago that a captain's voice was the barometric pressure of the room. If he sounded calm, they stayed calm. If he sounded worried, 12 men would spend the next 8 hours with their stomachs in knots. Graves cleared his throat. "Current intelligence suggests the canyon sweep will take approximately 4 hours. You'll move in from the northern mouth, clear the eastern ridge positions, and exit south. Air support is on standby, but we don't anticipate contact." Walker looked at the satellite image again. Something was wrong with it. He couldn't name what. It was the way a person feels when they walk into a house and sense that something has been moved, even though everything appears exactly where it should be. "How current is this intel?" he asked. 48 hours. Walker pressed his fingers against the table. 48 hours was a lifetime in a contested zone. The difference between a clear road and a road with 3 IEDs buried under it. The difference between an empty ridge and a ridge with a machine gun nest pointed directly at your approach. What about communications inside the canyon? There may be some signal degradation. The rock walls can. "Signal degradation," Walker repeated. He said it the way a man repeats a sentence that doesn't make sense. "So we go into a canyon with potential enemy positions, 48-hour-old intelligence, and we might not be able to talk to anyone while we're in there." Graves opened his mouth. Walker held up one hand. "I'm not asking. I'm just saying it out loud so we all know what we're talking about." Behind him, he heard Sergeant First Class Marcus Reyes exhale through his nose. Reyes had been Walker's right-hand man for 6 years. That sound, that quiet exhale, meant the same thing it always meant. Reyes thought this was going to go sideways. Walker almost always agreed with Reyes. He approved the mission anyway, because that was his job. They moved out at 0430, while the desert was still cold, and the sky was a deep bruised purple at the edges. 12 Rangers, full kit. Walker at the front. Reyes on his left shoulder. The rest of the team fanned behind them in the formation they had practiced until it felt like breathing. Walker loved this moment. The moment before, when everything was still possible, when the mission was only a plan, and plans were perfect. He had never found anything else in his life that produced that precise combination of fear and focus. Not his 2 years of college before he enlisted. Not the brief troubled relationship that had ended the year before this deployment. Certainly not the Saturday afternoons of his childhood, which had been quiet and long and slightly sad in the way that many childhoods are slightly sad. This was the only thing that made him feel exactly like himself. He stepped into the canyon. The walls rose on either side, and the shadows between them were still dark, even though the sky above was beginning to lighten. Walker's boots crunched against loose gravel. Ahead of him, the canyon curved left, and he couldn't see what was around that curve. His radio crackled. "Forward element, how copy?" "Clear so far," Walker replied. "Continuing movement." They moved for 20 minutes without contact. The canyon broadened slightly, the walls pulling back to give them a little more room, and Walker began to feel the first loosening of tension in his shoulders. Maybe Graves was right. Maybe this was going to be clean. Then Reyes grabbed his arm. Walker stopped. He turned. Reyes was not pointing at anything. He was just standing perfectly still, with his head slightly tilted, like a man hearing music from another room. "What?" Walker breathed. Reyes didn't answer immediately. Then he said very quietly, "There's no birds." Walker listened. The canyon was completely silent. Not the quiet of early morning. Something deeper than that. The silence of a place that has been cleared of everything alive and waiting. The first shot came from the eastern ridge. It hit Specialist Danny Ochoa in the left shoulder and spun him sideways into the canyon wall. Ochoa went down hard and didn't make a sound because the impact knocked the breath out of him. Walker was already moving before his mind finished processing what had happened, grabbing Ochoa's vest and dragging him toward a rock formation on the canyon floor. "Contact east! Contact east! Get down! Get down! Get down!" The canyon erupted. Walker had been in firefights before. He had been in 3 ambushes. But this was different from the first second, and the thing that made it different was the precision. The enemy fire was not the scattered, panicked shooting of fighters who had spotted a patrol and opened up in surprise. Every burst came from a specific position, aimed at specific people, timed to hit multiple rangers simultaneously. Someone had studied them. Someone had watched them train, watched them move, watched the way Walker positioned his team in tight terrain. Someone had built this trap, knowing exactly how they would walk into it. Reyes East Ridge, count the positions. 5, at least 5. Reyes was pressed behind a boulder, returning fire in controlled bursts. "There's another one at 11 o'clock. Walker, there's a position at 11. Walker looked. The northern mouth of the canyon, their entry point, which meant the exit was covered. He grabbed his radio handset. "Eagle Base Ranger 6, we are in contact canyon floor, requesting immediate air support over." Static. He tried again. The radio made a sound like someone crumpling paper near a microphone. The canyon walls, the rock composition. Something was eating the signal. He was getting nothing. "Comms are dead," he said, not panicked, just stating a fact. Reyes looked at him from behind the boulder. For the first time in 6 years, Walker saw something in Reyes's eyes that he had never seen there before. Fear. Not the functional fear that sharpened a man and made him better. The other kind. "Walker," Reyes said. They knew. They knew exactly where we'd be. The next 90 minutes were the worst of Walker's life. They fought for every meter of canyon floor. Ochoa was hit a second time, a grazing wound across his thigh that bled badly. Private First Class Torres took a round through his left hand and kept shooting anyway, which was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and Walker didn't have time to decide which. The team managed to reach a cluster of large boulders near the canyon's eastern wall, which gave them 360 cover, but it also meant they were pinned, completely, totally pinned. Walker kept trying the radio. Static. Static. And then once something that might have been a voice too broken to understand. He tried a different frequency. Emergency channel. Anything. Nothing. Sergeant First Class Yates, who had been a paramedic before he enlisted, and who handled the team's medical needs, was working on Ochoa with one hand while pressing himself flat against the rock with the other. Walker Yates said, "Ochoa needs evacuation, not in an hour, now." "I know." His shoulder. "I know, Yates. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing." "I know what you're seeing." Walker made his voice even. "Work the problem." Yates went back to Ochoa without another word. That was the thing about good soldiers. They pushed back exactly once to make sure you understood the severity of what they were telling you. And then they went to work. Walker pressed himself against the rock and thought. The enemy had them boxed. Northern exit covered. Eastern ridge had the high ground and the angles. He could see 2 positions on the western wall that hadn't fired yet, which meant they were being held in reserve for the moment when the Rangers tried to break out. The enemy commander, whoever this person was, had sequenced this perfectly. Apply pressure from the east and north. Wait for the Americans to attempt escape. Then activate the western positions to cut them down during the movement. It was elegant in a horrible way. Walker hated that he could appreciate it. He had 14 minutes of sustained ammunition left if every shooter on his team maintained their current rate of fire. After that, they would be throwing rocks. He picked up the radio one more time. Any station, this is Ranger 6. We are pinned, we have casualties, we need immediate support. Any station that can hear this transmission, please respond. He released the transmit button. Static. And then very clearly, a voice that was not static. A woman's voice. Calm the way, a still lake is calm. Not the calm of someone who doesn't understand what's happening, but the calm of someone who understands it completely and has already started solving it. Ranger 6, this is Shadow 6. I have eyes on your position. The canyon fell quiet for a moment. Or maybe it didn't fall quiet at all, and Walker simply stopped hearing it. Reyes's head snapped toward him. Yates stopped moving. Even Torres, with his destroyed left hand wrapped in a field dressing, turned and stared at the radio. Walker pressed the transmit button. Shadow 6, identify. No time for that right now, Captain. I count 7 enemy positions from my location. Your western approach has 2 concealed shooters you haven't found yet. Don't move until I tell you to. Walker looked at Reyes. Reyes spread his hands. He didn't know either. Shadow 6, we have no asset logged in this AO. Captain. The voice was patient, not impatient. Patient the way someone is patient when they are explaining something simple to someone who is under significant stress. I understand your hesitation. I'd have the same question. But right now you have approximately 9 minutes before that enemy unit makes a final push, and that push is going to be coordinated from a command position on the eastern ridge at your 2 o'clock. I'm going to need you to keep your people down for the next 4 minutes. Walker looked at 2 o'clock. The eastern ridge. He couldn't see any specific position from where he was. And then what? He said. A pause. Short. Decisive. And then the problem gets smaller. Her name was Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, and she had been in position for 72 hours before Walker's team ever stepped into that canyon. She was lying completely still on a rock shelf that jutted out from the canyon's northern ridge, positioned 400 meters above the canyon floor and approximately 800 meters from the enemy's primary command position. She had built a concealment structure over 3 nights, working in darkness, moving so slowly and carefully that she had once spent 45 minutes moving her left hand 6 inches to avoid disturbing a small cluster of loose pebbles that would have made sound. Her spotter, Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks, was positioned 12 meters to her left, separated from her by a natural rock formation that concealed them both from the canyon below. Brooks had been a ranger himself for 11 years before crossing into special operations, and he had the kind of dark, dry humor that men develop when they have spent too much time in places where nothing is funny. 7 confirmed positions, Brooks said quietly into his mic. Hostile elements on the eastern ridge are preparing to move. Command element at 2 o'clock from the ranger position is active. I'm reading 4 personnel in that group. Emily didn't respond. She was in the part of her process where talking became unnecessary because everything had narrowed to a single point of focus. Her breathing had slowed to something that didn't quite feel like normal breathing. Her heartbeat had settled into a rhythm that she had spent years training her body to maintain under stress. She was aware of everything. The wind speed, which had shifted slightly in the last 4 minutes and required a small correction to her aiming point. The temperature, the humidity that affected projectile behavior at this distance. The angle of her position relative to the target, and she held all of it in her mind simultaneously, without any single variable becoming more prominent than the others. She had been doing this since she was 15 years old. Not in combat. In the open fields behind her grandfather's house in central Virginia, where a white-haired man named Henry Carter had set up a target range when Emily was barely tall enough to handle the rifle he placed in her hands. Henry Carter had served in Korea. He didn't talk about it much, but on the evenings when he did talk, sitting on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea and the sun going down behind the tree line, He spoke about precision and responsibility in a way that Emily never forgot. "The rifle is a tool," he had told her once when she was 17 and had just made a shot that had surprised them both. A precise tool used by a precise person in service of a precise purpose. The purpose is never destruction. The purpose is protection. Every shot you take, you ask yourself, what am I protecting? And if you can't answer that clearly before you pull the trigger, you put the rifle down. She had been asking herself that question ever since. The answer over the years had taken different shapes, but it always came back to the same essential thing: people who could not protect themselves. Brooks's voice came back into her ear. "Command element is active. I'm counting down to their communication window. They're going to issue the final advance order in approximately Emily." She heard the shift in his voice. "What?" "One of the Eastern Ridge positions just moved. Third position from the north. They're repositioning to get angle on the Rangers' cover position." Emily adjusted. A small movement, almost imperceptible from any distance. "I see it, she said. "That position is going to be live in 90 seconds. She did the math. If the Eastern Ridge position reached its new firing angle before she neutralized the command element, the Rangers' cover position would be compromised. The sequence mattered. Order of operations. "Change of sequence," she said. "Copy," Brooks said. No argument, no question. That was what made Brooks exceptional. In 11 years together, he had never second-guessed her sequencing once she had made a decision. He offered information. He offered calculations. He never offered opinions after the moment of decision had passed. She shifted her aim 6 degrees north and slightly elevated. The wind held. She fired. Down on the canyon floor. Walker heard a sound that was different from the firefight sounds he had been hearing for the past 2 hours. A single shot not from any direction he had been tracking from somewhere high and to the north. Clean. Deliberate. The position on the eastern ridge that had been preparing to move went quiet. Walker didn't know what had happened. He looked at Reyes. Reyes looked back at him. Then the radio crackled. "Ranger 6, your eastern ridge threat 3 is neutralized. Command element in 30 seconds. Keep your people down." Walker pressed himself flat without another word. The next 30 seconds felt like they lasted a significant portion of his lifetime. Then 2 more shots. Both from the same direction. Both with that same quality of precision, not rapid fire, not panicked. Each one, deliberate and separate, placed with the care of someone who understood that every round had to count. The radio crackled again on the enemy's frequency, which Walker had been monitoring. What he heard was not a command. It was confusion. Voices asking where the command element was. Voices saying they had lost contact. One voice saying something in a language Walker didn't speak, but the tone needed no translation. Something had gone wrong for them. "Ranger 6, the woman's voice said. "Your western positions are going to pull back in approximately 90 seconds. When they do, your northern exit will open. You have a 3-minute window. Don't waste it." Walker got on his feet. "Listen up," he said loudly enough for his whole team to hear him over the residual gunfire that was already beginning to decrease in volume and intensity. "We are moving in 90 seconds. Northern exit. Yates, I need Ochoa mobile. Torres, you're on my left shoulder. Everyone else, standard break contact formation, move fast, and don't stop for anything." Reyes materialized at his right side. "Who is she?" "I don't know," Walker said honestly. "Should we be trusting this?" Walker looked at his team. Ochoa on the ground. Torres with his hand wrapped in a bloody bandage. 7 other Rangers pressed against rocks running low on ammunition, pinned in a kill zone that had been built specifically to end them. "We don't have a lot of other options," he said. Reyes nodded once. That was all. The western positions went quiet exactly when the woman had said they would. Walker gave the signal. They moved. The run to the northern exit was the longest quarter-mile of Walker's life. They were in the open for portions of it, exposed and moving, and 3 times fire came at them from the residual enemy positions that were still active on the eastern ridge. But it was scattered fire. Reactive fire. Not the coordinated precision attack that had pinned them hours earlier. The command structure was gone, and without a command structure, the individual fighters were guessing. They were still dangerous. But guessing men with rifles are different from organized men with a plan. Torres caught a fragment from a near miss that opened a gash on his right cheekbone, and he bled dramatically, but kept moving without complaint. Yates practically carried Ochoa for the last 200 meters, which required a level of physical effort that Walker was reasonably certain most civilian athletes could not have replicated. They reached the northern exit. Clear. Walker stopped at the canyon mouth and did a head count. 12 men. All present. He stood there for a moment with his hands on his knees, breathing. Then he straightened and picked up his radio. Shadow 6, Ranger 6, we are clear of the canyon. 12 men, 2 casualties, both mobile. What is your status? A pause. Then, status is fine, Captain. Get your people to the collection point. Walker looked up at the northern ridge. 800 meters of rock face and scrub brush and early morning shadow. Somewhere up there, a woman he had never met and could not see had spent how long? Days in a position watching that canyon, and had neutralized a coordinated enemy attack on 12 trained rangers, and her voice still sounded like someone ordering coffee. Shadow 6, he said. Go ahead. I don't know who you are or how you got here, but I want you to know. He stopped. He was not a man who found emotional expression easy. It was one of the things that his ex had told him more than once with increasing frustration. He had always understood this about himself, but had never managed to change it. Thank you, he said. It felt inadequate. He knew it was inadequate. Silence for a moment. Then, get your men home, Captain. That's all I need. The radio went quiet. Walker stared at it for a long moment. Reyes appeared at his shoulder. Collection point is 2 clicks north. Yates says Ochoa can make it if we move at a controlled pace. Walker clipped the radio back to his vest. Let's move. Walker? Yeah. Reyes was quiet for a second. Then he said, whoever she is, she's been watching that canyon for a long time. Before we walked in, she knew those positions before the mission started. Walker had been thinking the same thing. I know, he said. That means someone knew this was coming. Someone had information we didn't have. Someone sent her there in advance without telling us she was there. Walker looked north. The sky had fully brightened now. The desert was gold and red in the morning light. Beautiful in the specific way that places associated with violence often are, which is one of the many things Walker had never been able to adequately explain to anyone who hadn't been there. One problem at a time, he said, but he filed the question away in the place where he kept things that demanded answers. He would want to meet this woman. He would want to understand. And he would discover in the days that followed that understanding. Emily Carter was going to require him to question nearly everything he thought he knew about what a soldier was. Reyes was right that someone had known. The mission briefing that had sent Emily into that canyon had come through Special Operations Command at Fort Liberty, authorized at a level significantly above Captain Walker's clearance. It had been triggered by intelligence that the regular Army channels had not yet processed intelligence that suggested a coordinated series of attacks against Ranger units across the region was being orchestrated by a single network, a network run by a man named Marcus Vale. Emily had been given a file on Marcus Vale that was 300 pages long, and she had read every word of it in a single sitting, which had taken her most of one night in the operations center at Fort Liberty, while Brooke slept on a cot in the corner, and the duty officer pretended not to be watching her with visible concern. Vale was 53 years old. He had served as a Special Forces officer for 14 years, reaching the rank of major, before a contracting firm had offered him money that the Army could not match. He had spent 8 years after that doing work in contested zones that occupied a legal gray area that Emily found distasteful, though she understood the world well enough to know that distaste and prohibition were different things. And then approximately 4 years ago, something had changed. The file didn't explain the change clearly. There were multiple theories, ideological, financial, personal grievance, and the analysts at the agency that had compiled the file were careful to note that certainty was not available. What was certain was the result. Vale had begun using his knowledge of American tactics, American training methods, and American organizational culture to help adversary networks design operations specifically targeting U.S. forces. I wasn't fighting against America in any conventional sense. He was consulting, teaching people who wanted to hurt American soldiers exactly how American soldiers thought, moved, communicated, and made decisions under pressure. The ambush that had trapped Walker's Rangers was his signature. Emily could see his fingerprints on every element of it. The 48-hour-old intelligence that had been subtly manipulated through a compromised source. The canyon selection that exploited the specific way Ranger units established cover positions. The communication jamming that targeted the specific frequencies Walker's team would use. Vale hadn't guessed any of this. He had known. Because he had been there. He had done those things himself. He had planned operations in canyons and studied comms procedures and understood exactly how a Ranger captain would respond to contact. He was not the enemy using American knowledge against Americans. He was an American who had decided that his knowledge was a commodity and had sold it to people who wanted Americans to die. Emily had finished the file at 3 in the morning and sat for a while in the empty operations center with the lights humming overhead. Brooks had woken up at some point during that sitting and appeared at her side with a paper cup of terrible coffee. "You good," he said. "Thinking," she said. "About Vale. About all of it." She looked at the file on the table. "He knows how we operate. He knows our tendencies. He knows our decision frameworks. He's not beating us because he's smarter or because he has better resources. He's beating us because we trained him." Brooks sat down. He turned the paper cup in his hands. "You know what that means about our approach," he said. "We can't be predictable," she said. "Right. He'll expect a standard sniper package. One primary position, one alternate standard fields of fire textbook observation plan." "Which means?" Emily looked up. "We do none of that." Brooks looked at her with the expression he reserved for moments when she was about to suggest something that he considered either brilliant or insane, and frequently couldn't tell which until after it had either worked or not. "How long are you thinking we're in position?" 3 days minimum, possibly 4. Brooks processed this. 3 or 4 days in a fixed overwatch position in open desert terrain without resupply. Without position changes was not something that appeared in any standard operating procedure. It was the kind of thing that the body was technically capable of, but that tested the limits of discipline and physical endurance in ways that most people, even most trained soldiers, did not fully appreciate. "Okay," Brooks said. "Just that. Okay." That was why Emily had worked with Brooks for 9 years and intended to keep working with him for as long as the Army permitted. She had already memorized the canyon's layout from the satellite imagery. She had already calculated 3 possible overwatch positions and eliminated 2 of them based on their predictability. The third, the rock shelf on the northern ridge, was difficult to access, exposed to wind that made long-distance shooting technically demanding and would require building concealment from scratch. It was perfect because no one would expect it. She had gone in the next night, and she had waited. What people who had never done it did not understand about waiting was that it was not passive. Waiting, when done correctly, was one of the most demanding active disciplines Emily knew. You were constantly processing, constantly cataloging. Every movement on the canyon floor below her was logged and indexed. Every pattern of behavior, when the enemy fighters rotated positions, when they ate, when they communicated, how they communicated, built into a picture that became more accurate and more predictive over time. By the end of the first day, she knew where every position was. By the end of the second day, she knew who held each position and what their individual patterns were. By the third day, she had identified the command element. She had watched Marcus Vale, or at least the man she was confident was Marcus Vale, though she had only photographs for comparison, move between positions twice. He never stayed long. He never used the same route consecutively. He was being careful in ways that told her he understood the danger he was in. He was good. She had to acknowledge that. But he had made one consistent mistake. Every time he visited the Eastern Ridge command position, he spent exactly 12 minutes there. She didn't know why. Possibly it was the range of his encrypted communication equipment. Possibly it was a security protocol of his own design. Whatever the reason, it was consistent. 3 observations, 12 minutes each. Consistency was a sniper's best friend. She had been planning around that 12-minute window when Walker's Rangers walked into the canyon and everything accelerated. Brooks had been on the radio trying to relay a warning through back channels when the ambush began. It had come 17 minutes earlier than Emily's projections, which told her that Vale had adjusted his timeline, possibly because he had detected something that concerned him. Possibly because his own operational planning had simply moved faster than expected. Either way, the Rangers were in the canyon and they were in trouble, and Emily shifted from surveillance mode to action without missing a step. The sequence of shots she had made over the following 45 minutes was in her own private assessment. Probably the most technically demanding work she had ever done. Long-distance shifting wind, multiple targets at varying ranges, time-sensitive sequencing that required making decisions about priority and timing simultaneously. She didn't think about any of that in the moment. In the moment, there was only the next thing and the right answer to the next thing. The analysis came later, if it came at all. What she thought about during those 45 minutes was her grandfather. She thought about the target range behind his house in Virginia. She thought about his voice explaining that precision was not about accuracy alone, but about understanding the difference between what a rifle could do and what a rifle should do. She thought about a 17-year-old girl making a shot that surprised them both, and an old man who had seen things she would not understand until much later, putting his hand briefly on her shoulder and saying simply, "Good." She thought about what it meant that the skills he had given her those long summer afternoons of discipline and patience and attention were being used at this particular moment for this particular purpose. She thought, "I understand now, Grandpa. I finally understand what you were teaching me." When the Rangers cleared the canyon, Emily lowered her rifle and rolled carefully onto her back. The sky above the ridge was fully light blue and vast and empty of everything except a distant hawk turning lazy circles on a thermal. Brooks appeared at her side. He looked at her for a moment with the expression that meant he was doing the same calculation she was doing, running the numbers on what had just happened and what it meant. "Vale's command element is down," he said. "But Vale himself wasn't there," Emily said. "No, he moved before we started." She closed her eyes for a moment. He knew something was off. He moved early. Which means he's still operational. She opened her eyes. The hawk was still up there. She watched it for a moment. "He's still operational," she agreed. "And now he knows someone was watching. He knows someone disrupted his timeline and neutralized his command element. He's going to want to understand how." She paused. "He's going to want to find out who." Brooks was quiet for a moment. "Emily," he said, "if he knows there was a sniper package watching that canyon, he'll start looking," she said. "Yes, that's a problem." She sat up. 12 Rangers were somewhere 2 kilometers north of them, moving toward a collection point alive because she had been here. That was the only thing that mattered about the last 72 hours. Everything else was the next problem. And the next problem, she already understood, was going to be considerably more complicated than this one. Because Marcus Vale was not a man who accepted losses, and she had just cost him a very significant one. The collection point was a flat stretch of desert, 2 kilometers north of the canyon mouth, marked on Walker's map with a simple X, and in his memory with the very specific feeling of relief that comes when a man realizes he is not going to die today after all. A pair of Blackhawks came in low and fast, 18 minutes after Walker's team reached it, and the sound of those rotors was the best sound he had heard in a very long time. Ochoa was loaded first. Then Torres. Then the rest of the team climbed in with the particular exhausted efficiency of men who have been running on adrenaline for hours and are only now beginning to feel the weight of everything they spent. Walker was the last one on. He stood at the edge of the landing zone for a moment, before stepping up, looking back south toward the canyon. The morning light was full now, hard and flat against the desert rock, and the canyon mouth was just a dark gap in the ridge from this distance. Nothing visible, nothing moving. He looked at the northern ridge above the canyon. He couldn't see her. He had not expected to. He climbed into the helicopter. Reyes was seated across from him, helmet off, head back against the bulkhead. The older sergeant looked like he had aged 4 years in the last 4 hours. Walker suspected he looked the same. The helicopter lifted. The canyon fell away below them. "She's still up there," Reyes said without opening his eyes. "I know," Walker said. "Whoever she is, she's still up there on that ridge, and we just left." Walker looked out the window. The northern ridge was below them now, and then behind them, passing out of sight as the helicopter banked north. He kept looking until the ridge disappeared. "I know," he said again. Fort Liberty received them with the particular organized chaos that Walker associated with any return from a mission that had gone wrong in ways that people back at base were only beginning to understand. There were debriefers waiting. There were medical personnel. There was a colonel named Hartigan, who met Walker at the landing pad with a face that was doing the specific thing that senior officers' faces did when they needed information urgently and were trying not to appear urgent about needing it. "Walk with me, Captain," Hartigan said. Walker walked with him. His boots were still caked with desert dust and Ochoa's blood from where he had helped carry the man during the extraction. "Debrief me," Hartigan said. Walker debriefed him. He kept it clean and factual. Position of contact, timeline of events, casualties, communications failure, and then the part that he could tell Hartigan had been waiting for. "We received fire support from an unregistered call sign," Walker said. "Shadow 6, female voice. She had eyes on the canyon and provided precision fire support that neutralized the enemy command element and several other positions. She is the reason we came out of there." Hartigan's expression did not change. Not the way a man's expression doesn't change when he is hearing surprising information. The way it doesn't change when he is hearing information he already knew was coming. Walker stopped walking. "Sir," he said, "you know who she is." Hartigan kept walking 2 steps before he noticed Walker had stopped. He turned. There was a pause that lasted long enough to tell Walker everything he needed to know about the shape of this conversation. "There was a special operations asset positioned in the canyon AO, Hartigan said. "The details of that asset's mission are above your clearance level." "She saved my team," Walker said. 12 Rangers. She saved them. I'd like to know who I'm thanking." "You can submit a commendation through the proper channels, Colonel." Walker kept his voice level. He had learned this from his team. Push back exactly once, clearly, so the person understands you mean it. "Someone knew that canyon was going to be a kill zone before we walked into it. Someone had information that wasn't in our mission briefing. Someone put an asset in position to watch us, and they didn't tell us she was there. I'd like to understand why." Hartigan looked at him for a long moment. "Get cleaned up," the colonel said. "Report to the SOC briefing room at 1400. Some of your questions will be answered." He walked away. Walker stood in the middle of the landing pad with the wind coming off the desert and the taste of dust still in the back of his throat, and he thought about a woman lying on a rock shelf in the Arizona sun for 3 days, watching a canyon, and about a voice that sounded like someone who had made peace with every difficult thing in the world. He had a lot of questions. He suspected the answers were going to make things more complicated, not less. The SOC briefing room at 1400 held 4 people Walker had never met, and one he had. Hartigan was there seated at the end of the table with a folder closed in front of him. The 4 unfamiliar faces belonged to 2 men in civilian clothes who had the bearing of people who worked in buildings without windows. A woman in her 40s, in a pressed army uniform with a warrant officer insignia that Walker didn't recognize from any standard table of organization, and a man in his late 30s in a Special Forces uniform whose rank identified him as a lieutenant colonel, but whose name tape had been removed from his jacket. Walker sat. The man with no name tape spoke first. "Captain Walker, what I'm about to tell you is classified above your current clearance level. You're being read in on a need-to-know basis, and the scope of that read-in is limited to what is operationally relevant to you. You understand that?" "I understand," Walker said. "The asset that supported your team today is assigned to a special operations element that operates under a designation I'm not going to share with you. Her mission in the Arizona AO began 6 days ago, triggered by intelligence indicating that the ambush on your unit was one of several planned attacks in a coordinated campaign against Ranger elements in the region. The intelligence that triggered her mission, Walker said. Did it come from the same source as the intelligence in my mission briefing? The man paused. No. Meaning the intelligence in my briefing was compromised. Another pause. Longer. That is an active investigation, the man said. Walker placed both hands flat on the table. He breathed. He thought about Ochoa in surgery right now, somewhere in the medical wing. He thought about Torres's hand, 2 bones fractured nerve damage that the surgeon was still assessing. He thought about 12 men running across open ground while people were shooting at them. Someone gave us bad intel, he said quietly. On purpose. That is an active, I heard you the first time. He looked at the man directly. You said some of my questions would be answered. I'd like to know about Shadow 6. The no-name Lieutenant Colonel and Hartigan exchanged a look. Then Hartigan nodded barely, and the Lieutenant Colonel opened a folder. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter, he said. 31 years old. 8 years in the Army, the last 5 assigned to Special Operations Command. She has 23 confirmed long-distance engagements across 4 operational theaters. She is currently the Army's highest-rated active sniper by a margin that is not small. He paused. She does not appear in any public Army database. Her records are compartmented. The reason you didn't have her listed in your AO is because her presence in any AO is not shared outside her direct chain of command. Why? Walker said. Because of exactly the kind of intelligence failure that happened to your team today, the man in civilian clothes said. He spoke for the first time. His voice was flat and bureaucratic and very certain. The more people who know where an asset, like Staff Sergeant Carter, is operating, the more opportunities there are for that information to be compromised. She operates in isolated compartments for her own protection and for mission integrity. Walker sat with that for a moment. So she was there watching us walk into a trap, he said, and she couldn't warn us directly because that would have revealed her position and compromised the mission. She made contact with you at the earliest point where intervention became necessary, the Lieutenant Colonel said. She watched us get hit for 2 hours. She watched the situation develop and intervened at the point of maximum effectiveness. If she had engaged earlier, my men might not have been shot. The room went quiet. Walker knew he was pushing past the line that officers were supposed to stay behind in rooms with people from agencies that didn't put their names on their jackets. He also knew that he was going to keep pushing because 12 Rangers and 2 of them were in the medical wing, and he was sitting in a briefing room being managed. She made the right calls, the civilian man said. Her mission parameters required her to gather intelligence on Vale's network before engaging. Early engagement would have compromised that intelligence collection and potentially allowed Vale to disappear before his network was mapped. Marcus Vale, Walker said. The name landed in the room differently than he expected. The 2 civilian faces went a fraction more still. The warrant officer looked at the table. You know the name, the Lieutenant Colonel said. It was not a question. I heard communications during the firefight, Walker said. I know how to read a battlefield. And I spent the flight back here thinking about what kind of person designs an ambush like that. I've read the open-source reporting on contractor networks in the region. The name connects. A very long pause. Marcus Vale is the subject of an ongoing special operations manhunt, Hartigan said finally. He is the architect of the network that targeted your team and at least 3 other Ranger elements over the past 4 months. Staff Sergeant Carter's mission was to identify the scope of his network and, when operationally appropriate, to disrupt it. She disrupted it today, Walker said. She disrupted a part of it. Vale himself was not at the command position when she engaged. Walker had suspected this. The voice on the enemy radio, the one issuing commands with the confidence of someone who had designed the battlefield, had gone quiet before Emily's shots landed. Someone had moved fast. Someone had understood what was happening before it was finished happening. He pulled back, Walker said. He appears to have detected an anomaly in his operations timeline and adjusted, the warrant officer said. She had not spoken until now, and her voice was precise and rapid, the voice of someone accustomed to briefing complex information quickly. He does not know specifically what disrupted his plan, but he knows something did, and his pattern based on previous incidents is that he investigates aggressively. Walker looked at her, which means he's going to look for whoever was watching that canyon. He's already looking, she said. We picked up signals activity consistent with his network beginning reconnaissance operations in the Northern Ridge area within 40 minutes of the engagement. Walker sat back. He thought about Emily Carter on that rock shelf. 72 hours in position, building her concealment in darkness, patient in a way that he was not sure he could have been patient. And now Vale, a man who had spent 14 years as Special Forces, and 8 more years learning everything that Special Forces didn't teach him, was turning his attention toward finding her. She needs to exfil, Walker said. She knows, the lieutenant colonel said. Is she out? Another exchange of looks between the lieutenant colonel and Hartigan. She is in the process of exfiltrating, the warrant officer said carefully. Walker heard the careful. What does that mean exactly? It means, the warrant officer said, and now her precision was doing something slightly different, carrying a weight it hadn't carried a moment before, that her exfiltration route was compromised when Vale's network began its search pattern. She is currently in an alternate position and in communication with her handler. She is operational. She is not in immediate danger. But she's not out. Not yet. Walker pushed back from the table. He stood up. Every person in the room looked at him. I want to go back, he said. Hartigan said, Captain. She brought 12 of my men out of that canyon. I want to go back and bring her out. You are not operationally assigned to her mission. She was operationally assigned to mine, even though I didn't know it, Walker said. She spent 3 days watching that canyon because my unit was going to be in it. Her current situation is a direct consequence of what happened to my team. I want to go back. The room was quiet for a long moment. The man in civilian clothes looked at the man beside him. Some communication passed between them that Walker could not read. Then the lieutenant colonel said, Sit down, Captain. Walker sat. Emily Carter's exfiltration is being managed by her chain of command. Your unit is stood down for 12 hours pending medical assessment and equipment replenishment. After that, your unit may be assigned a supporting role in operations related to the Vale network. That decision has not been made yet. He paused. What I can tell you is that Staff Sergeant Carter is one of the most capable operators currently active. She has been in worse situations than this and has come out of all of them. Walker looked at the table. He thought about the hawk turning circles on the thermal above the ridge. Is there anything else? Hartigan said. Walker looked up. There were a dozen more things, but he recognized the shape of this conversation the moment when the information being shared had reached its limit, and anything further pressed would simply produce silence. No, sir, he said. He left the briefing room. In the hallway, he stood alone for a moment. Then he went to check on Ochoa. Emily moved at dusk. That was the second cardinal rule of field movement that her grandfather had never stated explicitly, but had built into her through years of practice so that it felt like instinct. You moved at the edges of things, edges of light, edges of terrain. The moments of transition when one condition was becoming another, and the eye of any observer was adjusting between two states. She had been in her alternate position for 9 hours. A narrow depression in the rock face 40 meters below and 300 meters north of her original overwatch position. Brooks had found it on day 1 as a contingency, which was why she had chosen Brooks 9 years ago and had refused every reassignment that had tried to take him away from her since. They're running a pattern, Brooks said quietly. He was watching the ground below through a monocular, his body pressed into the rock. 3 groups, roughly triangulated search. They know approximately where to look, but not exactly. How long before the search pattern reaches our position? Brooks calculated. She trusted his calculations. He had a spatial intelligence that was almost architectural, the ability to model 3-dimensional space in his head and run movement problems through it without pen or paper. At their current pace, the closest group reaches this area in approximately 45 minutes. 45 minutes to move through terrain that would require significant care in fading light while a search pattern run by people who understood fieldcraft was actively looking for them. Emily checked her equipment. She had stripped her kit down to essentials hours earlier. The rifle stayed. Everything else that was not critical had been cached and would be recovered later or not at all. "South route is closed," she said. "East route takes us into their search pattern. North route." Brooks looked at her. "The north route adds 3 kilometers. I know. In the dark. I know, Daniel." He didn't argue. He started breaking down his own position. The thing about Vale's search pattern that Emily understood, and that Vale probably also understood, was that it was making an assumption. It was assuming that a sniper's support package would follow standard doctrine for position selection, which placed overwatch positions at predictable distances and angles relative to the target area. Vale had designed the search pattern around those parameters, which meant the search pattern had a gap. The gap was in the north, because no standard doctrine placed an overwatch position as far north as Emily's original position had been. It was too far. It was too exposed to wind. It was too difficult to reach. In the calculus of traditional sniper doctrine, that position was suboptimal. Emily had chosen it precisely because it was suboptimal by standard calculation. But the alternate position they were currently in was only 45 minutes travel from the search pattern's edge, and the north route, while 3 kilometers longer, would keep them in the gap. She started moving. Brooks followed. They did not speak for the first 20 minutes. Movement in this terrain and in these conditions required the kind of concentration that eliminated conversation, not because it was prohibited, but because the mind simply didn't have bandwidth for both simultaneously. Emily chose her foot placements with care, distributing her weight, avoiding loose surfaces that would shift and sound. She moved slowly, slower than felt comfortable, slower than her body wanted to move, because her body wanted to move fast, and fast was wrong. Fast was how you got found. Slow was how you got home. At the 22-minute mark, Brooks touched her shoulder, the signal for stop. She stopped instantly and went into a crouch that distributed her profile against the rock she was beside. Brooks pointed. 40 meters below them and slightly east, she could see movement. A small group, 3 people by her count, moving along what was probably a dry wash in the terrain below. They were moving efficiently, not tracking a specific trail, searching an area, which was different. Their heads moved. They were looking. Emily and Brooks held position. 2 minutes. 3. The group below moved through the area and continued south away from them. Their search pattern was taking them exactly where Emily had predicted it would. Brooks exhaled beside her. They kept moving. The radio contact came at the 48-minute mark, which was 3 minutes after the point at which Brooks had told her the nearest search group would reach their alternate position. The math was clean. They had missed intersection by exactly the margin they needed. Shadow 6, this is Shepard. What is your status? Shepard was the call sign for the operations element managing her mission from Fort Liberty. The voice belonged to the warrant officer she had been in contact with since the mission began, a woman named Anita Voss, who had the specific quality that Emily valued most in operations support personnel. She asked exactly the questions that needed asking and did not ask the ones that didn't. Shadow 6 is mobile, Emily said, keeping her voice at a level that would not carry. North route. ETA to secondary extract, approximately 2 hours pending terrain. Copy that. Be advised that Eagle Base has a unit requesting assignment to support your extract. Emily kept moving while she processed this. Which unit? Ranger element. Specifically the element you supported this morning. She didn't respond immediately. Brooks glanced at her sideways. That's not necessary, she said. They're requesting, Voss said. Captain Walker has submitted a formal request for his unit to be assigned in a support role. Emily thought about Walker's voice on the radio that morning. The way it had sounded when he said thank you. The inadequacy of the word and the fact that he clearly knew it was inadequate and said it anyway because it was all he had. Tell him I appreciate it, she said. Tell him his team needs recovery time. Tell him we have the situation managed. A pause on Voss's end. He's going to argue, Voss said. I know. Tell him anyway. Another pause. Copy. Shadow 6, be advised we have a developing intelligence picture on Vale's current position. He has moved his primary element approximately 6 kilometers east of the canyon. He appears to be establishing a new command location. Emily stopped walking. Brooks stopped beside her. That's away from us, she said. Yes. He's not looking for us personally, she said slowly, working through it. He's looking for what we represent. He wants to understand what happened to his operation. He's repositioning to analyze and rebuild, not to hunt a specific person. That's our assessment as well, Voss said. Emily started walking again. The north route curved around a long ridge and would bring them to the secondary extract point, a flat stretch of desert that a helicopter could reach with enough clearance. 2 hours if the terrain cooperated. How many sites has he hit? Emily said. Voss knew exactly what she was asking. 4 ranger operations over 4 months. Today's was the largest in scope. The previous 3 resulted in 11 casualties total, 3 of them fatal. 11 casualties. 3 dead. Rangers. Men who had done everything right and had been killed anyway because someone who knew them had sold that knowledge to people who wanted them dead. Emily moved through the dark and thought about Marcus Vale rebuilding his command element 6 kilometers east, analyzing his failure and planning his next move. And she felt something that she did not often allow herself to feel during an active operation. Anger. Clean, cold, functional anger. The kind that didn't interfere with clear thinking, but sat underneath it like a foundation, giving every decision a bedrock of certainty. She was going to find him. Not today. Not tonight. But she was going to find him. Voss, she said, go ahead. When I'm out, I want a full briefing on his new position, his resupply network, and every communication intercept from the last 6 hours. I want to know how he communicates, how he moves, and who he calls when something goes wrong. A short pause. I'll have it ready. And tell Captain Walker. She paused. She hadn't planned to add this. Tell him his men did well today. Under conditions designed to break them, they held. He should know that. I'll pass it along. She ended the radio contact and kept moving. Brooks matched her pace without a word. That was the thing about the north route in the dark and contested terrain, with a search pattern behind them and 2 hours of movement ahead. There was no room for anything except the next step, and after the next step, the one after that. They reached the secondary extract point with 11 minutes to spare, which was not the margin Emily would have preferred, but was workable. The Black Hawk came in without lights, which she appreciated. The pilot was good. The aircraft settled onto the desert surface with a gentleness that seemed improbable for its size. She climbed in. Brooks climbed in behind her. The helicopter lifted immediately. She sat in the dark of the cargo compartment and felt the accumulated weight of 72 hours of field position settle into her bones all at once. Her back ached. Her eyes burned with the specific fatigue of sustained focus. She had consumed approximately 1,200 calories in the last 3 days, all of it from her field kit, none of it what anyone would describe as satisfying. She felt in the precise and honest language she used with herself, terrible. Brooks sat across from her. He looked approximately the same. They looked at each other in the dim red light of the cargo compartment for a moment. Good op, he said. Incomplete op, she said. We got 12 Rangers out. Vale is still moving. Brooks considered this. You want to go back? I'm going to go back, she said. Not tonight, not tomorrow. But I'm going to go back, and this time, I'm going to do it differently. How? She looked at the dark space between them, where the question hung. He's going to rebuild, she said. He's going to look at what happened today and identify what went wrong and fix it. He's thorough. He's disciplined. He's going to take time to do it right. She paused. That gives us a window. While he's rebuilding, he's not attacking. While he's not attacking, Rangers aren't dying. And when the window closes, we use it, she said. We build something he can't see, something that doesn't follow any pattern he's been trained to anticipate. Brooks was quiet for a moment. The helicopter moved through the dark, and the desert fell away below them, invisible. He's going to know someone's coming, Brooks said. After today, he's going to assume there's an active operation against him. He's going to be looking for us, even when he doesn't know where to look." "Good," Emily said. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "An enemy who's looking for you is an enemy who's spending resources on something other than what they were doing before," she said. "Every hour Vale spends trying to figure out who disrupted his operation today is an hour he's not planning his next ambush." Brooks absorbed this. Then he said, "You know, for someone who just spent 3 days on a rock shelf in the desert without a real meal or a functioning cot, you seem remarkably ready to go back." Emily almost smiled. Almost. The muscles that would have made it work were too tired. "Someone has to be," she said. Brooks leaned his head back against the bulkhead. He closed his eyes. Within 2 minutes, his breathing had slowed into sleep, which was a skill Emily envied and had never quite managed. She stayed awake. She was reviewing everything she knew about Marcus Vale. The file. The 300 pages. The career that had started the same way hers had, with the belief that service meant something, that the uniform meant something, that the skills being built in all those years of training were going to be used to protect people. Somewhere that belief had broken in him. She didn't know where. The file suggested possibilities. A contracting career that had required him to make decisions that the uniform had previously made simple and money had made complicated. A gradual drift away from the things that had anchored him. But the file was analytical, and she was not interested in analysis right now. She was interested in the operational reality. Marcus Vale was somewhere in the Arizona desert in a new position rebuilding. He was dangerous in the way that only a person can be dangerous who has spent decades learning a specific kind of lethality and has removed all the constraints that were previously attached to it. And he had now almost certainly made it personal. The disruption of his operation today was not just a tactical setback. It was, from his perspective, a statement. Someone out there was watching. Someone understood him well enough to predict his operation and counter it. Someone had in one morning dismantled something he had spent months constructing. That was a provocation. For a man like Vale, that was a declaration. Emily knew this. She had spent her career studying how people like Vale responded to exactly this kind of disruption. They escalated. They didn't retreat and rebuild quietly. They rebuilt with a goal. And the goal was now not just to continue attacking Ranger operations. The goal was to find the person who had disrupted them and eliminate that person first, which meant that the next phase of this operation was not going to be Emily hunting Vale. It was going to be both of them hunting each other. She understood this clearly and without drama. She had been in situations before where the enemy's attention had turned toward her specifically, and those situations had always resolved in one of two ways, through superior positioning or through a mistake. She intended to maintain superior positioning. She could not afford a mistake. The helicopter crossed over a ridge, and Fort Liberty's lights appeared in the distance below a scattered grid of illumination against the dark desert. Emily looked at those lights and thought about 11 Rangers who were down there somewhere, 2 of them in the medical wing, the rest of them in the specific suspended state of soldiers who had survived something terrible and were not yet sure what they were supposed to do with that. She thought about Walker's voice, the thank you that had wanted to be more. She thought about the little girl who didn't exist yet, the one who might someday hand a drawing to a woman she had never met. She thought about her grandfather. The helicopter began its descent. There was more to do. There was always more to do. But first, she was going to eat an actual meal, sleep for exactly 6 hours. Her body's minimum functional requirement determined through years of field experience, and then sit down with Voss and go through every piece of intelligence on Marcus Vale that had been collected in the last 24 hours. Because somewhere in that intelligence was the shape of what he was going to do next. And she intended to be there before he did it. She ate cold eggs and toast at 0200 in the Fort Liberty mess hall alone, except for a night shift cook who didn't ask questions, and a young private who fell asleep over his coffee at a corner table. The food was institutional and slightly wrong in temperature, and Emily ate every bite of it because her body needed fuel, and need was more relevant than preference. Brooks had gone straight to the barracks. She had told him to. He had argued for exactly 30 seconds, which was his limit, and then he had gone. She sat with the empty tray in front of her and the intelligence folder that Voss had left at the operations desk, and she read while the mess hall hummed its overnight hum around her. The intercepts from the last 6 hours were thin but telling. Vale's network had gone partially dark after the canyon operation, which was expected. When a sophisticated network takes a significant hit, the first response is communication silence. Reduce the signature. Assess the damage. Rebuild the architecture before restoring contact. But partially dark was not completely dark. There were 3 signals fragments that the collection team had captured in the 4 hours following the engagement, all encrypted. 2 of them were short, less than 30 seconds each, from locations that placed them approximately 8 kilometers east of the canyon. The third was longer, nearly 4 minutes, and originated from a location that the signals team had triangulated to a building in a small commercial district of a town called Whitmore, which was 22 kilometers northeast of the canyon, and had a population of approximately 4,000 people. 22 kilometers, away from desert terrain and into a populated area. Emily had read hundreds of intelligence files in her career, and the thing that separated the analysts she trusted from the ones she didn't was the ability to understand what a piece of information meant for the person who generated it, not just for the person reading it. Vale had moved his communication to a populated area within 4 hours of the operation being disrupted. That was not coincidence, that was doctrine. Populated areas created noise. Electronic noise, human activity, commercial traffic. The ambient signals environment of a functioning town. All of that noise made it harder for collection assets to isolate specific signatures. Vale knew exactly how American signals intelligence worked because he had spent 14 years inside the system that used it. He was hiding the way someone hides who knows precisely where to hide. Emily closed the folder. She sat for a moment with her hands around the paper cup of coffee that had gone cold at some point without her noticing. 6 hours of sleep. Briefing with Voss at 0800. Then the planning session that was going to require her to think in ways that were different from what the morning in the canyon had required. The canyon had been reactive. This next phase needed to be something else. She carried her tray to the return window and went to sleep. She was awake at 0748 and in the SOC briefing room at 0800, exactly, which was the only relationship with time she had ever had. Not early, not late, but a precision that some people found slightly unnerving and that Emily found simply natural. Voss was already there. The warrant officer had the organized intensity of someone who had also slept less than she needed and had compensated with professionalism, which was a trade Emily understood. Also in the room, which she had not expected, was Captain Ethan Walker. He was sitting at the far end of the table, in a clean uniform that was still slightly imprecise at the collar. The way uniforms are when a person has put them on fast and hasn't had access to a proper mirror. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes, when they found hers, were direct and a little raw, and he didn't look away. Emily looked at Voss. "How was approved for read-in on the Vale operational thread," Voss said. "Hartigan approved it about an hour ago. Given that his unit has been the primary target of Vale's network, the determination was that his operational knowledge was relevant." Emily looked at Walker. "Captain," she said. "Staff Sergeant," he said. And then immediately, without ceremony or preamble, "Thank you for what you did yesterday. I know I said it on the radio, and I know it wasn't enough." "It was enough," she said. "How are your men?" "Ochoa is out of surgery. They saved the shoulder. Torres will have limited use of 2 fingers on his left hand, probably permanently." He paused. "He's already asking when he can return to duty. His surgeon told him 6 weeks minimum, and he said, and I'm quoting here, that seems like a lot." Something moved in Emily's chest. She sat down across from Walker and looked at the table for a moment. "Sounds like a ranger," she said. "Yeah." Walker's voice was quiet. "Yeah, it does." Voss opened her folder. "We have a lot to cover." The briefing took 2 hours and 20 minutes, which was 30 minutes longer than Voss had scheduled for it. And the reason it ran long was Walker, who asked questions in the specific way that Emily recognized from her own approach to intelligence briefings, Not questions that demonstrated what he knew, but questions designed to surface what the briefer had not yet said. Vale's network, as Voss laid it out, was more extensive than even Emily had understood from the 300-page file. The 4 months of Ranger targeting had been funded through a contracting structure that routed money through 3 intermediary entities across 2 countries, which was sophisticated enough that the financial investigation was still incomplete. His operational network on the ground included at least 14 confirmed individuals, several of whom had also been former U.S. military or contractors. "He's built a team of people who know us," Walker said at the point where Voss laid out the personnel picture. "Not just him. He's recruited people with the same knowledge base." "Confirmed," Voss said. "So even if we get Vale, the network doesn't collapse. It has enough institutional knowledge to keep running." "That's the concern, yes." Walker looked at Emily. "That changes the target picture." "It changes it significantly," she said. "So we're not just looking for one man." "We never were," she said. "Vale is the architect. But the building exists independently of him now. We have to address both." Walker sat back. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How do you address both simultaneously without either one going to ground?" It was the exact right question. Emily had been turning it over since the helicopter ride back, and she had an answer, or the beginning of one. "You don't address them simultaneously," she said. "You create a situation where one is used to locate and neutralize the other. You use the network to find Vale, and you use Vale's response to the threat we represent to map the network." Walker looked at her steadily. "You're describing using yourself as bait. I'm describing creating visible pressure that causes the network to reveal its structure," she said. "That is not the same thing as bait." "It's similar enough," Walker said. Voss was watching both of them with the expression of someone at a tennis match who is following the score very carefully. "What I'm describing," Emily said with slightly more precision, "is conducting operations that are visible enough to force a response while being careful enough that the response can be observed and mapped before it reaches us." Walker looked at the table. He was doing the math on what she had just said, and she could see from the set of his jaw when he arrived at the implication. If Vale responds to visible pressure by escalating his search for the asset that disrupted his operation, he said slowly, that escalation is observable. And if the escalation requires him to reactivate communication links that have gone dark, then signals collection gets the data it needs to map the full network, Emily said. And if Vale himself moves to manage the search, then he's visible. Silence. Then Walker said, "This is going to require someone to be visible, in the field, doing something that Vale can detect." He looked at her directly. "That's you." "That's me," she agreed. "In terrain where Vale's network is already looking for you. In terrain where Vale's network is already looking for me," she repeated. "Which means they won't expect me to come back toward them. They'll expect me to be running in the other direction." Walker put both hands flat on the table. It was the same gesture Emily had noticed him make the previous day in the debriefing he hadn't known she'd been told about. A grounding gesture. A man making himself be still when his instinct was to move. "I want my unit in a support role," he said. "Captain, not argument, request." He looked at her. "You brought my men out. The least I can do is make sure someone's watching your back while you're doing whatever you're about to do." Emily looked at Voss. Voss looked at her folder. "The operations plan is still being drafted," Voss said carefully. "Then draft it with a ranger element in a support role," Walker said. He was not aggressive about it. He was just clear the way a man is clear when he has decided something and is not interested in the conversation where he undecides it. Emily looked at him for a long moment. "We'll see what the plan requires," she said. Walker accepted this. It was not agreement. They both knew it wasn't agreement. But it was not refusal either, and he appeared to understand the distinction. 48 hours after the Canyon operation, Signals Intelligence confirmed what Emily had suspected. Vale had reactivated 2 communication nodes that had gone dark immediately following the engagement. The first was in Whitmore. The second was 11 kilometers southeast of Whitmore in terrain that the imagery team identified as a disused agricultural facility. The reactivation pattern was the thing that told the story. The Whitmore node came up first for 40 seconds and then went dark. 11 minutes later, the southeastern node came up for 22 seconds. Both transmissions were encrypted. Both were too short to allow full decryption, but long enough to confirm the nodes existed and were operational. "He's checking his network," Emily said when Voss walked her through the intercepts at 1400 on the second day. He brought up 2 nodes with short contact windows to confirm they were still functional. He didn't communicate substantively. He just confirmed the infrastructure was intact. "Which means he's preparing to use it," Voss said. "He's preparing to do something that requires that infrastructure," Emily said. "And the reason he went dark first and is only now coming back up is that he spent 48 hours deciding whether the network was compromised or whether the disruption in the canyon was a one-time intervention by an isolated asset." What decision did he reach? Emily thought about what she knew of Vale. The career, the tactics, the man. "He decided it was an isolated asset," she said. "Because if he thought the network was systematically compromised, he wouldn't be bringing nodes back up. He'd be cutting the whole thing and rebuilding from scratch. The fact that he's testing existing nodes means he believes the network is fundamentally intact, and what happened in the canyon was a specific threat that can be identified and removed." Voss processed this. "He's going to escalate his search." "He's going to escalate his search," Emily confirmed. "And when he does, he's going to use those nodes to coordinate it, which gives us the window." She looked at the map on the table. The canyon, Whitmore, the agricultural facility, the search area. "I need to go back into his search area," she said. "I need to be detectable in a way that's controlled. Something that puts me in his search pattern, but gives me the ability to observe how the network responds." Voss said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's dangerous," Emily said. "Yes, I know." "I was going to say complex," Voss said. "But yes, also dangerous." Brooks appeared in the doorway behind Voss. He had a paper cup of coffee in each hand, and he gave one to Emily without ceremony, which was accurate because he had made this gesture approximately 2,000 times over 9 years, and it had ceased to require ceremony some time ago. "I heard the end of that," he said. He sat down. "When do we go?" 3 days, Emily said. "I want 3 days to prepare. I want the signals team on full collection for 72 hours, so I have the most current picture of where those nodes are activating. And I want—" She paused and said the next part in a way that was more careful than the rest of it. "I want Walker's unit briefed on a potential QRF role." Brooks looked at her. She could see him deciding not to comment on the fact that 2 days ago she had told Voss that Walker's unit was not necessary. "Okay," he said. He drank his coffee. She went to see Ochoa that evening. She didn't have to. There was no operational reason to. But she had been thinking about him since Walker had told her about the surgery, and thinking for Emily was rarely a passive activity. The medical wing was quieter at 1900 than it was during the day. A nurse at the desk gave her a slightly uncertain look. Emily was in civilian clothes, her military affiliation not immediately visible, and then checked her identification and pointed her toward a room at the end of a short corridor. Ochoa was awake, sitting up in the bed at an angle that suggested his shoulder was making itself known. He was a compact man in his late 20s, with a face that was open in the way that faces are when their owner has not yet learned to keep things back. He looked at her when she came in, and his expression moved through several things very quickly. "You're Shadow 6, he said. "I'm Emily Carter," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You're the one who—" "Yes." He nodded. He seemed to be working on what to say. Emily was familiar with this. The moment when someone had something they genuinely wanted to communicate, and the ordinary architecture of language felt inadequate. "My wife is flying in tomorrow," he said finally. "I'm glad," she said. "She's going to ask me what happened. She's going to want the whole story." He paused. "I don't know how much of it I can actually tell her." "Tell her what you need to tell her," Emily said. "The classified parts can wait." She's going to ask who saved us. Emily was quiet. I'm going to tell her, Ochoa said. I know I can't tell her your name, but I'm going to tell her there was a woman, with a rifle, who spent, Captain Walker said, 3 days. 3 days out there before we ever walked into that canyon. He stopped. My wife is going to want to say thank you. Tell her the thanks aren't necessary, Emily said. They are to her, Ochoa said simply. Emily looked at the man in the bed with his arm immobilized and his face open and his wife flying in the next day, and she felt something that she allowed herself to feel fully for exactly the duration of the moment, which was the discipline she had developed for this, because a person in her work who did not feel these things was dangerous, and a person who felt them too long was ineffective. Your wife sounds like a good person, she said. She's a better person than I am by a significant margin, Ochoa said. I tell her that regularly. She disagrees. She's also wrong about that particular thing. Emily almost smiled. The muscles worked this time. Not much, but enough. She said goodnight. She walked back through the corridor and out of the medical wing. In the open air, she stood for a moment. The desert night was cold in the specific dry way that desert nights are, the temperature having dropped sharply from the day's heat. She could see stars with a clarity that Fort Liberty's limited light pollution allowed. She thought about Ochoa's wife on a plane. She thought about a woman sitting in a seat 30,000 feet above the ground, heading toward a man she loved, who had almost died, carrying in her body all the adrenaline and fear and relief that had accumulated since the phone call. Emily thought about what it meant to be the person that had made the phone call unnecessary. She had thought about this across the years of her career in different forms, with different faces attached to it. Every person she had protected had people who loved them and would have grieved them. Every outcome she had altered by being in position at the right moment had consequences that rippled forward in ways she could not fully trace. Her grandfather had said the weight means you still remember why you fight. She had carried that sentence for 15 years, and it had never felt as precise as it did in this moment, standing in the desert air outside the medical wing, with Ochoa's face still clear in her mind. She went back to her room. She looked at the intelligence file on Vale for 40 minutes. Then she closed it and slept. Day 2 of the preparation phase brought a development that Voss flagged at 0630 with a message to Emily's room that said, "Only come in as soon as you're up," which was Voss's way of saying immediately. The signals team had picked up an additional activation during the night. Not one of the 2 nodes from the previous day. A third node in a location that the analysts had not previously identified. It was active for 11 seconds before cutting out, which was short enough to suggest that whoever had activated it was either running a quick check or had nearly violated their own communications security and corrected. But 11 seconds was enough. The location was 6 kilometers northwest of Whitmore. Emily looked at the map for a long time. Whitmore to the southeast node to the northwest node. 3 points. She placed them in the spatial model she maintained in her head and let the geometry speak. The 3 nodes form a perimeter, she said. Voss was standing beside her. That's how we read it too. A perimeter around what? That's the question. Emily traced the triangle in her mind. The center point was 3 kilometers from Whitmore in terrain that the imagery team hadn't specifically analyzed because nothing in the previous intelligence had pointed to it. I need current imagery of the center of this triangle, she said. Already requested, Voss said. We'll have it in, she checked her watch, about 4 hours. 4 hours, Emily repeated. 4 hours was 4 hours. She looked at the map. She looked at Whitmore. She thought about Marcus Vale in a building in a small commercial district, establishing a communications perimeter with himself at the center. He's not running from this, she said. He's consolidating. Explain, Voss said. A man who is running doesn't set up a communications network. A man who is afraid doesn't take time to build a perimeter of nodes. Vale is setting up for a sustained operation. She paused. He's decided he's not going anywhere. He's decided that whatever disrupted his canyon operation is a threat to be managed, not a reason to retreat. Voss was quiet for a moment. That makes him more dangerous. It makes him findable, Emily said. A man who is running leaves a trail that goes cold. A man who is setting up a sustained operation leaves a trail that gets more visible over time, not less. He's going to need resupply. Personnel movement, communication, every one of those is an observable event. The door opened and Walker came in. He was in full uniform. He had clearly been awake for some time. "Voss called me," he said by way of explanation. He looked at the map. He found the 3 node locations that Voss had marked. He did the same geometry Emily had done, and she watched his face when he arrived at the same conclusion she had. "He's building a base," Walker said. "Close to it," Emily said. "In the middle of a civilian population center. He knows we don't operate inside civilian areas the same way he does," Emily said. "It's a deliberate choice. He's using the civilian context as protection." Walker's jaw tightened. "He's hiding behind people who have nothing to do with this." "Yes," Emily said. There was nothing to add to that. The 4 of them. Emily, Brooks, Voss, and Walker stood around the map table and looked at the 3 marked locations and the unmarked center of the triangle that was about to become the most important piece of terrain in this operation. Then Walker said, "What's in that center area?" "We're waiting on imagery," Voss said. Walker looked at Emily. Emily looked at the map, and then her radio clipped to her belt crackled. It was the signals team duty officer, a specialist whose voice Emily recognized from the previous days of collection work. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a 4th node activation. New location. It's been active for 2 minutes and it's still running." Emily grabbed the radio. "Location." The specialist read off grid coordinates. Emily plotted them in her head. It was not at the center of the triangle. It was north of Whitmore, further north than any of the other nodes. And it was not cutting out after 11 seconds or 30 seconds. It had been running for 2 minutes, and it was still going. "That's not a check signal," Brooks said. He was looking at her. "That's a sustained transmission." "He's communicating," Emily said. "Right now. He's running a sustained communication that's been up for 2 minutes. He either doesn't care that it's detectable or—" She stopped. The thought arrived fully formed. "Or he wants it to be detected," she said. The room went quiet. "It's a signal to the person who disrupted the canyon," Walker said. He said it slowly because he was still working it out. "He's telling you he's here. He's telling you exactly where he is. He's issuing an invitation," Brooks said. His voice was flat with the particular flatness that indicated he considered the invitation distinctly unwelcome. Emily looked at the radio in her hand. The specialist's voice came back, 4-minute mark, still transmitting. She thought about what Vale knew. He knew someone had been in that canyon. He knew the disruption was precise and coordinated, which told him it was not a random event, but a targeted response. He knew or strongly suspected that the asset responsible was still in the operational area, because a complete extraction would have required a level of observable activity that his search teams had not detected. He was right. She was still here, and he was using a sustained transmission to tell her that he was not running. He was waiting. 5-minute mark, the specialist said. Emily looked at Walker. Walker looked at her. "This is a provocation," Walker said. "He's trying to get you to move toward him before you're ready." "I know," she said, "so we don't respond." She looked at the map. The triangle. The center she didn't have imagery for yet. The north node that was currently broadcasting like a lighthouse. "We don't respond to the transmission," she said. "But we start moving now. Not toward that node, toward the center of the triangle." She looked at Voss. "Get me that imagery faster." "I'll push the timeline," Voss said, already reaching for her phone. "And get me updated communications on every node position in the last 24 hours, specifically looking for any movement pattern that places a single individual as the common link between all of them." Voss stopped dialing. She looked at Emily. "You're looking for a courier." "He's not transmitting digitally for the operational details," Emily said. "He's too smart for that. But someone is physically connecting those nodes. Someone is moving between those 3 locations and carrying the information that coordinates the network." She paused. "Find me that person, and we find the center of the operation." 6-minute mark, the specialist said on the radio. And then 30 seconds later, transmission terminated. Silence. Vale had said what he had to say. Whatever it was, it had required 6.5 minutes. The signals team would spend the next several hours trying to decrypt it. Emily suspected they would not succeed. Vale's encryption was current and sophisticated. What the transmission gave them was location, not content. But location was enough. Walker moved to stand beside her at the map table. He was close enough that she could sense the controlled tension in the way he was holding himself. The specific tension of a man who understands a threat and is actively preventing himself from reacting prematurely. "He's not afraid of us," Walker said quietly. "No," Emily said. "He thinks he has the advantage. He thinks he has enough information about how we operate to predict our next move," Emily said. "He thinks that in a contest between his knowledge of our systems and our ability to adapt to that knowledge, his knowledge wins." Walker was quiet for a moment. "Does it?" Emily looked at the 3 node locations on the map. She looked at the empty center. "It would," she said, "if I were going to do what he expects." Walker waited. "I expects a precision engagement against one of his node locations," she said. "He expects me to respond to the provocation by moving toward the visible signal. He expects us to try to take him out the same way we disrupted his canyon operation. Long-distance, isolated technical." "And instead," Walker said. Emily straightened. She looked at the map one more time. Then she turned to face Walker directly. "Instead," she said, "we find the courier, we follow the courier to the center, and we take the entire network structure apart from the inside, not the outside." She paused. "He built this network on the assumption that we fight the way he trained to fight. Isolated engagements, compartmented assets, technical precision from a distance." Another pause. "He never accounted for what happens when the asset he's hunting changes the rules." Walker held her gaze for a long moment. "I'm going to need my unit," he said. Emily looked at him. She thought about Ochoa's wife on a plane. She thought about Torres asking when he could return to duty. She thought about 12 men who had run across open ground because she had told them to and who had made it. "Yes," she said. "You are." Walker's exhale was short and quiet. Relief or something adjacent to it. "Brief me," he said. So she did. The imagery came in at 10:47, and what it showed changed everything. Voss spread the printouts on the map table without speaking, which was how Emily knew the content was significant. Voss was a woman who narrated her actions when the actions were routine and went quiet when they were not. The center of the triangle was not empty terrain. It was a working horse ranch. 12 structures spread across the property. A main house, 4 outbuildings, a barn, paddocks, vehicle access from a county road that connected to the highway running north of Whitmore. The property had been operating under the same family name for 22 years, according to the county records that the intelligence team had pulled alongside the imagery. Walker stood at Emily's shoulder and looked at the photographs. "A ranch," he said. "A functioning business," Emily said. "With legitimate commercial activity that explains vehicle movement, personnel presence, supply deliveries. Everything that a command element needs to operate looks exactly like what a working ranch looks like from the outside." "He chose it deliberately," Walker said. "He chose it months ago," Emily said. She pointed to a detail in one of the images. "That vehicle track between the northern outbuilding and the main structure is new. The soil compression pattern is recent, 2 to 3 months. He was building this before the canyon operation." The canyon wasn't his primary objective. It was a demonstration. Walker looked at her. "A demonstration of what?" "Of capability," she said. "He was showing someone that he could hit American military units with precision and impunity. This wasn't just about killing Rangers. It was about proving to a client or a partner network that his knowledge base was operational and effective." The room had gone very still. Brooks said from his seat at the far end of the table, "He was advertising." "How was closing a deal?" Emily said. "The canyon operation was a proof of concept. Whoever he was selling his services to needed a demonstration before committing resources." She looked at the imagery again. "Which means the ranch is not just a command location. It's where the deal gets finalized." Voss said, "We don't have confirmation of any principals other than Vale's known network." "The 4-minute transmission last night," Emily said. Get me everything the signals team has on the origin point of any corresponding transmission. If Vale was sending, someone was receiving. Voss was already on her phone before Emily finished the sentence. Walker was looking at the ranch imagery with the particular expression of a man rearranging a problem in his head. If there are additional principals on that property, or moving toward it, taking down the network just got significantly more complicated. It got more important, Emily said. That's not the same thing. No, she said. It's not. The courier appeared on camera at 1:34. The signals team had been running retrospective analysis on vehicle movement in the Whitmore area, correlating timestamps from commercial traffic cameras on the county road with the node activation windows from the previous 48 hours. The correlation produced a single vehicle, a dark blue pickup truck, older model, no distinguishing features. It had been in the vicinity of all 3 node locations within windows that matched each activation. 1 vehicle, 3 nodes. The math was simple. Voss put the camera footage on the screen in the briefing room. The truck was visible for 11 seconds on the county road camera, heading northwest, which was toward the ranch property. Driver, Emily said. Can the imagery team enhance the driver's window? Already requested, Voss said. The enhanced image came back in 20 minutes. The driver was male, mid-40s, baseball cap, no distinguishing features visible. But the vehicle's front plate was partially visible. Partial plate plus vehicle description plus movement corridor equaled a workable identification problem. The intelligence team ran it and came back with 3 possible vehicles registered in the county. One was eliminated immediately because its registration address was 40 kilometers south. The second was registered to a commercial landscaping company whose business records were clean in ways that felt slightly too clean to Emily, which was a professional instinct rather than an evidentiary standard, but which she noted anyway. The third was registered to a man named Gerald Pruitt, 51 years old, former Army logistics specialist, honorably discharged 8 years ago, currently employed by the same landscaping company whose records felt too clean. Emily looked at the connection and felt the pieces fit. Vale had found his courier the same way he had found everything else. Through the network of people who had served, who had the knowledge base, who had reasons or needs or wounds that made them available. Pruitt is the link, she said. Walker had been standing at the window. He turned around. You're sure? I'm sure enough to move on it, she said. We find Pruitt. We find the route between the nodes and the ranch. We find the route, we can be in position when he makes his next run. When is his next run? Walker asked. Emily looked at the node activation pattern. The timing between activations. The sequence. Tonight, she said. Based on the activation pattern, the next courier run happens between 2100 and 2300. He moves after dark. Probably thinks that reduces visibility. Walker straightened. My unit can be ready in 4 hours. I need 2 hours with the operations plan first, Emily said. This is not a direct intercept. We do not stop Pruitt. We do not let him know he's been identified. We follow him to the ranch, and we use his arrival to establish exactly what is happening on that property before we take any further action. Walker looked at her. You want to let the courier walk into the target location. I want to know what's in that location before we commit to an approach, she said. If there are additional principals, buyers, partners, whatever Vale is meeting with, I need to know the full picture before we act. One wrong move, and the people with the most valuable intelligence walk out the back while we're coming in the front. It was a reasonable operational argument. Walker knew it was reasonable. Emily could see him knowing it. She could also see him not liking it. My team follows at distance, he said. Observation only until you give the word. Observation only, she agreed. At 2047. That evening, Gerald Pruitt got into his dark blue pickup truck outside a storage facility on the eastern edge of Whitmore and drove northwest on the county road. Emily watched him leave from a position that Brooks had established earlier in the day during a reconnaissance run that had been disguised as a routine equipment check. She was in a civilian vehicle, a rental unremarkable, the kind of thing that disappeared against the background of ordinary traffic, parked far enough back that the truck's taillights were small red dots in the dark. Brooks drove. Emily watched. In 3 other vehicles distributed across the surveillance corridor, Walker's Rangers maintained their assigned positions. Reyes in the second vehicle. 2 more Rangers in the third. Walker himself in the fourth, positioned furthest back in the formation, which Emily had specified, because Walker was the element she most needed to control if things moved fast. She trusted him. She had decided that 2 days ago and had not revisited the decision since, because revisiting decided things was not productive. But trust and proximity were different quantities, and in a surveillance operation where premature action could compromise everything she wanted. Her most action-oriented person at maximum distance from the front. Walker had accepted this without argument, which elevated her opinion of him further. "He's turning north," Brooks said quietly. Emily looked. The taillights had shifted left. County road to a smaller road, unpaved from the sound of the tires when the truck crossed the edge of the asphalt. "Follow the turn same distance," she said. Brooks followed. The road was dark, no other traffic. The pickup truck moved at an unhurried pace, which told Emily that Pruitt was not anxious. He had done this before. He was comfortable with the route, with the timing, with the operation. That comfort was useful information. Comfortable couriers made predictable movements. Predictable movements were observable. Her radio crackled. Walker's voice quiet and controlled. "Ranger elements hold current positions. Do not advance until Shadow 6 calls movement." Good, Emily thought. He's managing his people exactly right. The pickup truck turned again, through a gate that Emily's imagery analysis had identified as the northern access point to the ranch property. The gate was open, which meant someone had been expecting the truck. "He's on the property," Brooks said. "Copy." Emily keyed her radio. "All elements subject is inside the target property. Hold. I want 2 minutes of zero movement from all vehicles." Confirmations came back from each position. Clean and quiet. Emily counted to 120. Then she picked up the observation equipment and began building the picture. What she observed over the next 47 minutes would later form the core of a classified intelligence report that would reach 4 levels above her clearance grade before being formally distributed. But in the moment, sitting in a dark rental car on an unpaved road outside a horse ranch in the Arizona desert, it was simply information that she absorbed and organized with the precision she applied to everything. Pruitt entered the main house. Lights were already on inside. She could identify through a window whose curtain had not been fully closed at least 4 people in addition to Pruitt. One of them moved with the particular controlled deliberateness that Emily associated with people who had spent long years in environments where careless movement had consequences. That one was Vale. She was not 100% certain. She could not see a face clearly. But the way this person moved through the space, the economy of it, the way he positioned himself, relative to the room's access points. The way he stood when listening to someone speak was not a posture that was taught in business schools or law firms. It was a posture that had been built by years of environments where the door you stood with your back to was the door you died through. "I have a probable on Vale," she said to Brooks. Brooks said nothing. He raised his own observation equipment. 15 seconds later, confirmed probable, same read on the movement pattern. Emily clicked her radio. "Shepard, this is Shadow 6. We have a probable confirmation on primary target inside the structure. I'm counting 5 individuals minimum. Working on full count." Voss's voice came back. "Copy Shadow 6. What is your read on the meeting?" "Active," Emily said. "Whatever this is, it's happening right now." She watched the window. The 5 figures inside the house moved and talked in the specific rhythms of people conducting business. Not social business. Commercial business. The kind where the thing being exchanged has a price, and both parties know the price and are in the process of deciding whether the price is acceptable. "Second vehicle on the property," Brooks said. She looked. A second vehicle had been parked near the barn. When they arrived, she had noted it during her initial observation, but had set it aside as potentially belonging to the property's regular operation. Now she looked at it more carefully. The vehicle was not a ranch vehicle. The tires were wrong. Too wide, too new, the kind of tires that went on vehicles used in irregular terrain rather than on a commercial livestock property. and the vehicle had been backed in close to the barn wall in a way that positioned it for fast exit. "That vehicle doesn't belong here," she said. "No," Brooks agreed. Emily did a rapid calculation. 5 people inside the house, 2 vehicles on the property. Pruitt as the courier who had been used to connect 3 communication nodes over the past 48 hours. Vale running a sustained transmission the previous night in a pattern that suggested he was confirming an arrangement with someone. "There's a buyer," she said. "Someone on this property is not part of Vale's network. Someone came here to finalize a transaction." Brooks lowered his equipment and looked at her in the dark. "If we move now, we secure everyone on the property before the transaction completes," she said. "If we wait, the buyer leaves with whatever they came to get," Brooks said. "Information, intelligence product, whatever Vale has been building with his knowledge of Ranger operations." Emily keyed her radio. "Shepard, I need an immediate decision from the command element. We have what appears to be an active transaction in progress at the target location. Probable buyer on site. Request authorization to advance to secure phase." A pause, longer than she wanted. Then Voss, "Stand by Shadow 6, elevating to command authority." Stand by. 2 words that in Emily's operational experience always contained more time than anyone wanted them to contain. Walker's voice came on a separate channel. "Emily." Not Shadow 6. Her name. He had used her name exactly once before, and it had been in a context that was less urgent than this. "I have eyes on a figure moving between the barn and the main house. I can't confirm identity from my position." She sharpened her focus on the gap between the barn and the main house. There. Movement. A single figure not hurrying, but moving with direction. "I see it," she said. The figure went inside. Now 6 people in the main house. "Walker," she said. "Yeah. If this deal completes and that second vehicle leaves the property, we lose the buyer. We lose whatever intelligence product Vale has sold. And we lose any chance of understanding who in the broader network this buyer represents." A pause. "And if we move without authorization?" "Then we move without authorization," she said. The pause on Walker's end lasted 3 seconds. Emily counted them. "My team is ready," he said. "Shepard, this is Shadow 6. Her voice was clear and unhurried and absolutely certain. "I am advising immediate advance to secure phase. If command authority cannot authorize within 60 seconds, I am proceeding on operational judgment. Please confirm receipt of this transmission." Voss came back immediately. "Received Shadow 6. Command is a background sound voices something being decided in a room she couldn't see. Command authorizes. You are clear for secure phase. Ranger element is in support. Rules of engagement are in effect." Emily was out of the vehicle before Voss finished the sentence. What happened in the next 11 minutes was later described in the after-action report as a textbook secure phase operation conducted under time-sensitive conditions. Emily found the description accurate in the technical sense and incomplete in every other sense, which was the relationship she had always had with after-action reports. She moved on the main house from the North Brooks on her left, the route she had identified during her 47 minutes of observation that placed them at the structure's blind corner. Walker's element came in from the east, using the vehicle track between the barn and the house for concealment. Reyes's element covered the southern access. The second vehicle by the barn was her first priority, because a vehicle with exit-oriented positioning was an escape vector until someone controlled it. She reached it in 40 seconds and had it rendered non-operational in another 15. Not destroyed, just non-functional for the time required. Then she moved to the house. The entry went fast. Walker's element breached the eastern door at the same moment Emily and Brooks came through the northern access, and the overlap of simultaneous entry was the thing that prevented anyone inside from having time to respond effectively. 5 of the 6 people inside surrendered immediately. They went to the floor with the speed of people who understood exactly what was happening and had made a rapid calculation about resistance. The 6th did not. He came through the interior door from the main room into the corridor where Emily was moving, and he was fast, in the way that people are fast, when fast is a survival behavior rather than a trained response. He had a sidearm, and he raised it. Emily already had her weapon up. They held that position for 1 second. In that second, Emily looked at the man, and the man looked at Emily, and in the specific stillness of that moment, she confirmed what she had suspected from the window observation. Marcus Vale was 53 years old, and he looked exactly like the photographs in his file, except that the photographs could not convey the quality of his attention. The way he looked at her with a precision that was almost clinical, like a man who has spent decades reading situations and is reading this one at maximum concentration. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he said. Her name. He knew her name. "Hands," she said. "You're better than I expected," he said. His voice was conversational, unhurried. A man discussing something of professional interest. "The position you used in the canyon, the northern shelf. I had dismissed that position in my analysis. Too much wind variance. Too far from standard standoff distance. I was wrong about that." "Hands," she said again. "I want you to know," he said, "that I am not speaking to you as an adversary right now. I am speaking to you as someone who has read your service record and understands exactly what you are and what you're capable of." "You've read a classified record," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Everything about her was steady, except the thing underneath all of it, the cold anger that had been there since she read his file and had not diminished. "Which means you had access to personnel records you should not have been able to access. That's one of the things you're going to answer for." "I had access to many things I shouldn't have had access to," he said, almost cheerfully. "That's what happens when you spend 14 years building relationships with people who keep the records." "Last time," she said. "Hands." He looked at her for another moment. She could see him making the calculation that she had already made. He was good. He was experienced. He had been in rooms like this before, but not with her. He lowered the weapon. Walker came through the far door at that moment, weapon up, taking in the corridor, and Vale and Emily in a single sweep. He stopped. "Clear," Emily said. Walker looked at Vale. He said nothing. Emily could see everything Walker was thinking moving across his face in the controlled way that Walker controlled things, the 3 fatal casualties, the 11 wounded Ochoa in surgery. Torres's hand, 12 Rangers running across open ground. Vale turned his head and looked at Walker. "Captain Walker," he said with the same clinical recognition he had used with Emily. "The Ranger element from the canyon. Interesting that you're here." Walker said absolutely nothing. Emily had wondered how Walker would respond to being in the same space as the man who had designed the operation that had nearly killed his team. She had constructed several models based on what she knew of him. The model she had considered least likely was the one that turned out to be accurate. Walker holstered his weapon. He reached into his vest and produced a flex cuff. He walked up to Vale, turned him with a hand on his shoulder, not roughly, but with the absolute absence of anything that could be called gentle, and secured his hands behind his back. "You have the right to remain silent," Walker said. His voice was completely flat. "I'd encourage you to use it." He passed Vale to Reyes, who had appeared in the corridor from the eastern entry. Then Walker turned to Emily. "The buyer," he said. "In the main room," she said. "One of the 5 on the floor." "Identified?" "Not yet." They went through the door together. The main room held 4 men on the floor, with Rangers standing over them and Brooks conducting a rapid search of the space. Pruitt was one of the 4. Emily identified him by his build and the baseball cap he was still wearing. The other 3 were unfamiliar. 2 of them were in their 30s. Combat fit the kind of physical condition that came from structured training programs and not from gym memberships. They wore civilian clothes, but their posture was military, in the way that military posture persists regardless of what a person is wearing. The 3rd man was different. He was older, late 50s. He was lying face down on the floor with his hands behind his head in a position of practiced compliance, and the thing that made him different from everyone else in the room was that his compliance was completely, entirely calm. Not the calm of someone who had made a quick calculation about resistance. The calm of someone who had been in this situation before and understood exactly how to manage it. Emily crouched beside him. "Sir," she said, "I'm going to need you to look at me. He turned his head. The face was not in Vale's file. It was not in any of the intelligence she had reviewed. But it was a face that carried something, a texture of authority, of institutional weight, that she associated with people who had operated at the highest levels of very specific kinds of organizations. "I don't believe you're here to buy Vale's operational knowledge," she said. The man said nothing. "The two men with you have the bearing of protection detail," she said. "Which means you're a principal, not an operator. You didn't come here to purchase information. You came here to evaluate something." She paused. "The question is what?" Still nothing. Brooks appeared at her side. He handed her a phone face up. Found it in his jacket pocket. No lock screen. Emily looked at the phone. The screen showed an open text conversation. The most recent message had been sent 40 minutes ago. The message read, "Asset confirmation complete. Proceeding to final agreement." Emily read the message twice. Then she looked at the man on the floor. "Asset confirmation," she said quietly. "You weren't buying Vale's intelligence product. You were confirming that Vale's asset inside our system was real." She felt the words forming and their meaning arriving simultaneously, the way it happened when all the pieces of a picture suddenly resolved into something recognizable. "There's someone inside. Someone with access to classified personnel records. Someone who gave Vale my service record and gave Vale the intelligence in Walker's mission briefing." The man on the floor closed his eyes. Emily stood up. She turned to Walker. He had heard everything. His face was doing something that his face did not usually do, which was fail to be controlled. The color had gone out of it, and something harder had taken its place. "There's a source inside," he said. He said it quietly, but the quiet was not the quiet of calm. It was the quiet of a man who is deciding how to contain a very large feeling in a very small space. "Yes," Emily said. "Someone inside our system gave them the intelligence that sent my men into that canyon." "Yes." Walker breathed, one breath, controlled. "Who?" he said. "That's what this man is going to tell us," Emily said. She looked down at the figure on the floor. "And you are going to tell us," she said directly to him, without heat, without theater, just the specific certainty of a woman who has made accurate assessments in difficult circumstances for a long time, and is making one now, because the alternative is a charge list that no amount of institutional connection is going to make survivable. The man on the floor opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he said, "I want a lawyer, and I want a representative from the Inspector General's office." Emily looked at Voss, who had arrived during the secure phase and was standing near the door with her phone already in her hand. "Get them," Emily said. Voss stepped outside to make the calls. Walker stood in the middle of the room and looked at the people on the floor, and the phone in Emily's hand, and the open door through which Reyes had taken Marcus Vale into custody. Then he looked at Emily. "This goes higher than Vale," he said. "Yes," she said. "It does." "How much higher?" Emily looked at the man on the floor, at the text message on the phone, at the two men with protective detail posture who had come with someone to an Arizona ranch to confirm that a source inside the U.S. military was real and operational. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but we're going to find out." Walker nodded once. He looked at the room. He looked at his rangers, each one doing exactly what they needed to do. Securing the space, managing the people on the floor, moving with the precision of a team that had been through something terrible and had come out the other side still functional. He looked at Emily. "You knew this was coming," he said. Not accusatory, just observational. "When you were in the canyon, when you disrupted the operation, you already suspected it went deeper than Vale." "I suspected something made the intelligence failure too clean," she said. "The timing of the bad intel in your briefing. The specific nature of what was wrong with it. It wasn't a failure of collection. It was a failure of someone who understood exactly which information to alter and how to alter it to create maximum damage." "Someone who knew our systems from the inside," Walker said. "Someone who had access to the same training and knowledge base that Vale had," she said. "Someone who had served." Walker was quiet for a long moment. "They used rangers to prove a point," he said. "To close a deal. My men, His voice didn't break. Nothing about him broke. But the sentence came out carrying everything it contained. They used my men like a demonstration. Emily looked at him. And now, she said, we're going to use this room to start unraveling exactly who made that decision and how far the damage goes. She paused. Every one of your men gets to go home because of what happened tonight. And every piece of information we pull out of this room moves us closer to making sure no other Ranger unit gets walked into a canyon built by someone who was supposed to be on their side. Walker held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned and went back to managing his team, because that was what Walker did. He processed things, and then he moved forward, and Emily recognized this as a quality she had significant respect for. Brooks appeared at her shoulder. Signals team is running the phone data. Voss says they'll have a preliminary picture of the network extension within 2 hours. 2 hours? She said. You should eat something, he said. You've had approximately 800 calories today. I'm fine. You're always fine, he said. That's not actually an argument against eating. She looked at him. He looked back with the expression he reserved for moments when he was going to win an argument through persistence rather than logic. After the preliminary signals report, she said. Before, he said. She almost argued. Then she thought about what was ahead of them. The interrogations, the network unraveling the source inside the system that needed to be found and neutralized before they did further damage. And she thought about her grandfather saying that a sniper needed to understand not just the immediate shot, but the full arc of what came after. The work ahead of her was long. She needed to be functional for all of it. Fine, she said. After we secure the scene. Brooks nodded. He looked around the room. At the men on the floor. At Walker's Rangers. At the phone in Emily's hand with its damning message. You know, he said quietly. When this started 3 days ago on a rock shelf in the canyon, I thought the objective was relatively contained. Protect the Rangers, disrupt Vale's network, extract cleanly. It was never that contained, Emily said. No, he agreed. It never is with you. She looked at the phone one more time. Asset confirmation complete. Proceeding to final agreement. Somewhere in a building she had not yet identified a person with a clearance and a uniform and access to the intelligence that kept American soldiers alive had made a decision to sell that access to people who wanted those soldiers dead. That person did not yet know that tonight had happened. That person did not yet know that the network they had served was in custody, that the ranch was secured, that the phone with the text message was in the hands of someone who understood exactly what it meant. That person was at this moment still somewhere inside the system. Emily intended to change that. She clipped the phone into an evidence bag and handed it to Brooks. There was more work to do. There was always more work to do. The preliminary signals report came in at 0143, and it was worse than Emily had expected, which was saying something because she had expected it to be bad. The network extension was not 2 or 3 people. The signals team had traced the communication architecture from the phone recovered at the ranch backward through 4 layers of encrypted relay. And what they found at the end of those 4 layers was a contact pattern involving 11 individuals across 3 military installations: Fort Liberty, Fort Bragg, and a signals intelligence facility in Maryland, whose name Emily recognized because she had been briefed on it twice in her career, and both times the briefing officer had emphasized the sensitivity of what was processed there. 11 people, 3 installations, 4 months of active communication with Vale's network, while Ranger units were being walked into kill zones built from intelligence those 11 people had helped provide. Emily sat with the report in the operations center at 0200 and read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at the wall for a moment. Brooks was across the room on the phone with the signals duty officer, asking follow-up questions in the methodical way he handled technical information. Voss was at her desk coordinating with the legal and counterintelligence teams that had been activated when the scope of the ranch operation became clear. Walker was somewhere in the building. Emily had last seen him 40 minutes ago standing in the corridor outside the room where Marcus Vale was being held, not doing anything, just standing there. She had not interrupted him. She picked up her radio. "Walker," she said. A pause. Then, "Here. Operations Center. Now." He arrived in 3 minutes. He had a paper cup of coffee that he set on the table without drinking from it. He looked at the report she slid across the table to him. He read it without speaking. Emily watched his face. She had become, over the past 4 days, reasonably accurate at reading what Walker was processing from what his face did while he was processing it. Right now, his face was doing something she had not seen it do before. Not the controlled management of anger from the main room at the ranch. Something quieter and harder than anger. 11, he said. 11 confirmed, she said. The counterintelligence team expects the number to grow as they trace secondary contacts. 3 installations. He set the report down. Someone at a signals facility in Maryland had access to intelligence product about my unit's mission briefing. The working theory is that the compromise at your briefing level was downstream from the Maryland facility, Emily said. Someone at that facility altered collection product before it entered the distribution pipeline. By the time it reached your mission briefing, the alteration was invisible because the original had already been replaced upstream. Walker looked at her. How long has this been going on? 4 months at minimum, she said. Possibly longer. We won't know the full timeline until the counterintelligence investigation completes. 4 months, he said. He said it the way a man says a number that he is trying to attach to real things. 4 months of Ranger operations. 4 months of briefings built on intelligence that someone inside had shaped specifically to endanger the people reading it. 4 months of missions planned around a picture of the battlefield that had been deliberately distorted. Walker, Emily said. He looked at her. The 3 fatal casualties from the previous operations, she said. She said it directly because she had learned that Walker preferred directness to management. The counterintelligence team will be opening those operations for full review. There will be accountability. He was quiet for a long moment. Accountability doesn't bring them back, he said. No, she said. It doesn't. Another silence. The operations center hummed around them. Then Walker picked up his coffee. He drank from it. He set it back down. What happens now? He said. The man from the ranch, the one who asked for the IG representative, he started talking 2 hours ago, Emily said. His name is Gordon Hale, former Defense Intelligence Agency, retired 6 years ago. He's been operating as a broker connecting Vale's network to institutional contacts with access. She paused. He gave up 3 names in the first 90 minutes of the interview. 3 of the 11. 3 of the 11, she confirmed. The counterintelligence teams at the 3 installations were activated 40 minutes ago, simultaneous. No advance notice within the affected commands. Walker absorbed this. So right now, somewhere in Maryland and at Fort Bragg. People are waking up to find counterintelligence officers at their doors, she said. Yes. Something moved across Walker's face. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more complicated than satisfaction. The way a person feels when justice is being done for something that cannot be undone. And Vale, he said. He's talking too, Emily said. Less than Hale, but enough to confirm the network structure. He's negotiating, which means he thinks he has something to offer. His lawyer is going to spend the next several months discovering that he does not have as much to offer as he believes. He designed operations that killed American soldiers, Walker said. The sentence was flat and final. He's going to spend a significant portion of the rest of his life in a federal facility, Emily said. That part is not in question. Walker nodded once. He looked at the report again. Then he looked at Emily. You knew, he said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation in the specific register that Walker used when he was acknowledging something that impressed him and did not want to make a production of the acknowledgement. When you were on that ridge for 3 days before we walked into the canyon, you already had the shape of this. You knew it was bigger than Vale. I suspected the intelligence failure was internal, she said. I didn't have confirmation. But you stayed in position. You watched. You waited until you had the full picture. That's the job, she said. No, Walker said. That's beyond the job. The job is the target in the scope. You were building a case. Emily looked at him. The target in the scope without the case just displaces the problem. Vale gone, network intact, source inside the system still active. 6 months later, another ranger unit walks into another canyon. She paused. My grandfather used to say that precision is understanding the full distance the shot travels. Not just to the target. Everything that happens after. Walker was quiet for a moment. He sounds like someone worth knowing, he said. He was, she said. Jumped. At 0600. Emily did something she had not done in the 4.5 days since this operation began. She went outside and stood in the open air without a specific operational purpose. The desert morning was just beginning. Cold and clear the sky, moving from black to deep blue at the eastern edge. No wind. The kind of stillness that the desert produced in the hour before the sun made everything sharp and relentless. She had 6 hours before the first formal debrief with the counterintelligence team. She had eaten at Brooks's insistence a real meal 2 hours ago. She had slept for 4 hours the previous afternoon before the surveillance of Pruitt's route, and she was functional on that, plus the accumulated discipline of years of managing her body's requirements with the same precision she applied to everything else. She stood in the cold air and allowed herself for this specific window of time to feel the full weight of the past 4 days without trying to manage or organize it. 12 Rangers, 2 of them in the medical wing recovering, 10 of them who had run out of a canyon under fire and made it, 3 men from previous operations who had not made it, whose cases were now going to be reopened and examined and attributed to decisions made by people inside their own system. 11 individuals across 3 installations who had made choices that Emily found difficult to place inside any framework she had for understanding human decision-making. She understood ideology. She understood financial pressure. She understood the way grievance accumulated over years could reshape a person's moral architecture until what had once been unthinkable became a transaction. She understood all of this intellectually. She could not, in the specific cold morning air of this specific day, make it feel like anything other than betrayal. Her radio crackled. Brooks. You're going to want to come back inside, he said. His voice had a quality she recognized. Not urgency. Something more specific than urgency. What is it? She said. The 11th name, he said. Counterintelligence confirmed it 20 minutes ago. You need to see who it is. She went inside. The name was Colonel James Pritchard. He was the commanding officer of the Signals Intelligence Facility in Maryland. 58 years old. 34 years of service. He had been until 40 minutes ago when counterintelligence officers had met him at his office door, one of the most trusted senior officers in the Signals Intelligence community. He had also been, for the past 14 months, the primary conduit through which Vail's network had accessed collection product from the most sensitive intelligence pipeline available to American military operations. Emily read the preliminary counterintelligence summary and then read it again. 14 months. Not 4 months. 14. The 4-month window they had been working from was the period during which the network had been actively targeting Ranger units. The 14-month window was when Pritchard had begun his involvement with Vail's network. He had spent the first 10 months of that period providing intelligence product that had not been used to design ambushes. It had been used for something else. Something that the counterintelligence summary described as assessment of American collection capabilities and gaps, which was the formal language for giving an enemy network a map of everything American intelligence could and could not see. Vail had not built his operational capability from nothing. He had built it with a 10-month education in exactly where American intelligence was blind. Pritchard had given him the blind spots. 34 years, Brooks said. He was standing beside her reading the same document. 34 years, she repeated. Why? He said. It was the question she had been turning over since the ranch. The question she always ended up with when she examined the specific category of betrayal represented by people like Vail and Hale, and now Pritchard. People who had been inside. People who had been trusted. People who had built careers on the foundation of service, and then had decided at some point that the foundation was negotiable. I don't know, she said honestly. The investigation will surface a reason. There's always a reason. Money, grievance, ideology, some combination. But the reason never fully explains the decision. She paused. Some things can't be fully explained. They can only be accounted for. Brooks was quiet for a moment. 14 months, he said. While we were in the field, while we were doing exactly this work, trusting that the intelligence we were operating on was clean. We adjust, Emily said. We always adjust. He looked at her. How are you this calm? I'm not calm, she said. I'm functional. Those are different things. He accepted this. Then he said, Voss wants you in the debrief room. Hartigan is there. There are 3 people from agencies that haven't introduced themselves yet, which based on my experience means this goes significantly higher than a military counterintelligence matter. Emily set the summary down. Then we go find out how high, she said. The debrief room at 0700 held. Hartigan 2 men in civilian clothes who did not introduce themselves, a woman from the Judge Advocate General's office, and a man in a 3-piece suit whose calm was institutional in the way that Hale's calm had been institutional. The calm of someone accustomed to operating at levels where things were decided that affected many people who never knew the decisions were being made. Walker was not in the room. Emily noted his absence and set it aside. The debrief lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. Emily answered every question with the same precision she applied to everything. Timeline, observation, decision points, operational judgments, and the reasoning behind each. She did not editorialize. She did not express opinions about the scope of the investigation or the individuals in custody. She provided what she had observed and what she had done and why she had done it, and she did it with the completeness that came from having spent 4 days in the specific state of focus where everything was noted and nothing was discarded. At the 2-hour mark, the man in the 3-piece suit who had been listening without speaking said, Staff Sergeant Carter, the decision to advance to secure phase at the ranch before formal authorization was confirmed. Emily looked at him. You made that call with authorization in progress, but not yet confirmed, he said. The window was closing, she said. Delay past that window would have allowed principals to leave the property with intelligence product and without identification. The operational cost of waiting exceeded the procedural cost of acting. That's your judgment, he said. Yes, she said. Others might have exercised different judgment. Others might have, she said. I exercised mine. The outcome suggests the judgment was sound. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, It was, and went back to his notes, and the debrief continued. At the end, when she stood to leave, the woman from the JAG office said, Staff Sergeant Carter, for what it's worth, and I understand that may not be much given the full scope of what this investigation is going to uncover, what you did in that canyon and at that ranch is going to be taught. Emily looked at her. As a case study, the woman said. Operational Patience Intelligence Discipline Sequencing. It's going to be taught. Emily said, Make sure they teach the part about why, not just the how. The woman looked at her with an expression that was not quite understanding and not quite confusion. The how is the technique, Emily said. The why is the only part that matters. She left the room. She found Walker in the hallway outside the medical wing, which was where she had found him in a different configuration 3 days ago when she had first come to see Ochoa. He was standing with his back against the wall and his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, which was the posture of a man who was done performing composure for the day and was just being a person for a few minutes. He looked up when he heard her. Debrief done, he said. Done, she said. Pritchard, he said. It was not a question. Hartigan had evidently told him. Yes, she said. Walker pushed off the wall. He stood with his arms at his sides and his jaw set, and he breathed through something that was private enough that Emily looked briefly away to give him the space of not being observed. 34 years, he said. I know. He sat in rooms with people like me, Walker said. He sat in rooms where we talked about what we were doing and why we were doing it, and he sat there and he stopped. He made a short controlled sound that was not a word. Emily looked at him directly. Walker. He looked at her. You're going to feel this for a long time, she said. What happened in that canyon? What we found at the ranch? Pritchard. All of it. You're going to carry it. And that's right. You should carry it. Men who carry nothing are the ones you don't want standing next to you. She paused. But right now, you have 10 Rangers who came home. You have Ochoa who came home. You have Torres who is going to ask his surgeon for the 5th time today when he can return to duty. You have a team that was in a canyon built to kill them and walked out the other side because they held together. Walker looked at her. That's yours, she said. That doesn't get taken away by what Pritchard did, or what Vale built, or what Hale brokered. Your team held. That's yours. The silence stretched out for a moment. Then Walker said, I put in paperwork this morning, commendation, for you and Brooks. You didn't have to. I know, he said. I wanted to. He paused. It felt like something I could actually do. Emily understood this precisely. The way action, even small action, was sometimes the only lever that was available. Thank you, she said. He nodded. From inside the medical wing, they heard a voice loud, slightly indignant. Unmistakably, Torres saying to someone, 6 weeks is not a medical timeline, that's a suggestion, and a longer-suffering voice responding that it was absolutely a medical timeline and not open to interpretation. Walker's face did something complicated, and then resolved into something that was close to a smile. Well, not all the way, but close. That's my team, he said. That's your team, Emily agreed. 4 days after the ranch operation, with counterintelligence investigations active at 3 installations and 11 individuals, either in custody or under formal administrative hold. Emily was called into Hartigan's office at 1400. She sat across from the colonel and waited. Hartigan had the look of a man who had spent 4 days managing consequences that had expanded well beyond anything he had originally anticipated when he approved an asset deployment to watch a canyon. He looked tired in the specific way that senior officers looked tired when they had been on the phone with people above them continuously for an extended period. Staff Sergeant Carter, he said. Sir, she said. The scope of this investigation is significant, he said. Yes, sir, she said. The counterintelligence review is going to require testimony and documentation from you and Sergeant Brooks across an extended period, he said. Possibly several months. Understood, she said. Hartigan looked at her for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. A recommendation has been submitted, he said, from a joint authority, including the Commanding General of Special Operations Command, to offer you a position at the Special Operations Center here at Fort Liberty. Not as a field asset. As the lead instructor for the Long-Range Precision and Surveillance Program. Emily held the information for a moment. Instructor, she said. The position has been vacant for 14 months, Hartigan said. The last person who held it transferred to a field assignment. The program has been running on temporary instruction. He paused. The recommendation includes an assessment that Staff Sergeant Carter possesses a combination of operational experience and demonstrated analytical capability that makes her uniquely qualified to rebuild the program from its current structure. Emily looked at the colonel. The field operation, she said carefully. Is there a specific operational reason this recommendation is coming now and not in 3 months after the investigation completes? Hartigan met her eyes. The specific operational reason is that the investigation has identified gaps in how we train precision assets to recognize and respond to intelligence failures at the source level. The approach you used in this operation, the way you sequenced decisions, the way you identified the internal compromise, the way you used the network's own structure against it, that approach is not currently in any training curriculum. Emily was quiet. It needs to be, Hartigan said simply. She thought about her grandfather. The rifle as a tool, precision as a discipline of purpose. The way he had taken a young girl who was good at a specific technical skill and had spent years teaching her that the skill was only as valuable as the understanding it was built on. She thought about what it meant that there were right now at Fort Liberty and at other installations young soldiers being trained to do what she did without the foundational understanding that made the doing of it mean something. She thought about Ochoa and Torres and the 3 men from previous operations whose names were in her memory and would stay there. She thought about the 11 people whose decisions had created the conditions that had put all of those names in her memory. She thought about what a training program looked like that produced people who could not be compromised. Not just technically skilled, anchored, grounded in the understanding that made the skill inseparable from the responsibility. "I want to redesign the curriculum," she said. Hartigan looked at her. "That's the expectation." "From the ground up," she said. "Not adjust the existing program, rebuild it." "That's the expectation," he repeated. "You'd have the authority and the resources to do it." Emily looked at the desk between them. She thought about the field. She thought about the rock shelf in the canyon and the 72 hours of patient total attention and whether she was ready to leave that behind. She thought about what Brooks had said on the helicopter, about the approach she had used being something that wasn't in any training curriculum. It needed to be. "Yes," she said, "I accept." She told Brooks that evening in the mess hall over the actual hot food that she was making a consistent effort to consume since the operation had ended. He listened. He processed. Then he said, "I'm going with you." "You don't have to. You're going to need someone to tell you when the curriculum is getting too abstract," he said. "That's me. I've done it for 9 years. I'm not stopping because you moved to an instructor billet." She looked at him. He looked back with the expression that meant the conversation about whether he was doing this was already over, and the conversation about how he was doing this had not yet begun. "Instructor assignments usually require you to give up your field asset status," she said. "I'll make arrangements," he said. She knew better than to push it. Brooks made arrangements the way he made everything quietly, completely, without drawing attention to the process. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged. He ate his food. 2 weeks after the ranch operation, on a morning that was cold and bright, with the specific clarity of Arizona in early autumn, Emily walked into a room at Fort Liberty where 14 new candidates for the long-range precision and surveillance program were seated in 2 rows. They were young. Some of them were very young. They had the bearing of people who had been selected for something and knew it, the particular combination of pride and focus that Emily recognized because she had felt it herself many years ago, sitting in a different room, waiting for instruction that would shape the rest of her professional life. She stood in front of them and looked at them for a long moment without speaking. They were expecting she knew a certain kind of opening. The technical framework, the equipment orientation, the qualification standards, the pathway through the program. What she gave them was something else. "Before we talk about technique," she said, "I want to talk about purpose. Because technique without purpose is just a skill set, and a skill set without purpose is at best incomplete. At worst, it's dangerous." She had their full attention. She had learned over years to read attention in a room, the difference between the attention of people who were processing and the attention of people who were waiting for something to be over. This room was processing. "Every one of you can learn to put a round on a target at distance," she said. "Some of you already can. That's not why you're here. You're here because you need to understand what comes after the round. Who goes home because you were in position. What happens in the space between your decision and its consequences." She paused. "This program is not going to teach you to be better shooters. It is going to teach you to be better thinkers. The shooting is the last 5%. The other 95 is everything that makes the 5% worth anything." A hand went up in the second row. A young woman, early 20s, the kind of direct gaze that indicated she was not the type to ask a question she didn't genuinely need answered. "Staff Sergeant Carter," the woman said. "Can I ask what made you approach it that way? Personally, I mean. What put you in that mindset?" Emily looked at her for a moment. "My grandfather," she said. "He served in Korea. He was a marksman. He spent years teaching me the technical side of this work. And then one day I made a shot that surprised both of us, and I thought that was the point. The technical achievement." And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Now tell me what you were protecting." She paused. "I've been answering that question ever since. Every shot, every operation, every decision. What are you protecting? If you can answer that clearly, you're ready. If you can't, you put the rifle down." The room was quiet. The young woman in the second row said, "What's the answer to what you were protecting?" Emily looked at her. She thought about 12 rangers running across open ground. She thought about Ochoa's wife on a plane. She thought about Torres and his 5 times a day argument with his surgeon. She thought about 3 men whose names she would carry for the rest of her life. She thought about 11 people who had made a choice that required people like her to exist. People who can't protect themselves, she said. That's always the answer, every time. The tactics change, the terrain changes, the threat changes. The answer is always the same. She looked at the 14 faces in front of her. That's what we're here to protect, she said. That's what this work means, and that is what every hour of this program is going to be built around. She paused one final time. So let's get started. Outside the building, somewhere across the installation, a group of rangers were running a morning formation. She could hear the cadence faint through the walls, the rhythmic call and response of a team that had been through something and was still moving. Walker's unit. She recognized the cadence specifically because she had heard it during the 4 days in the canyon area, carried on the desert air to the ridge where she had been watching. She had noted it then and filed it away with everything else. She had not told Walker that. There were many things she had observed about his unit that she had not shared with him because not every observation required a report. Some things were simply known, and knowing them was enough. She turned back to her class. 14 people. The beginning of a curriculum that did not yet exist in its final form, but existed in her, clearly built from everything she had learned in every position she had ever held, in every canyon and on every ridge, through every decision that had been heavy, and every outcome that had required her to remember exactly what she was protecting and why. Her grandfather had given her the foundation. Every operation since had built on it. Now it was time to pass it forward. A sniper was not defined by the targets she hit. A sniper was defined by the lives she saved. And a teacher was defined by what she built in the people who carried her work into the future after she was done. Emily Carter had spent her career being the person who answered when someone whispered for a miracle in the dark. Now she was going to make sure there were more people ready to answer. The room waited. She began.